But the end of education ultimately then for us is well, what were humans made for? It comes down to like our anthropology. And in classical education, from a Christian perspective, the human anthropology of a created being made in the image of its creator in some way that theologians debate and talk about, that purpose contextualizes everything. It animates it, it informs it, it guides and directs it, gives meaning and purpose to it, puts restraints on it. But if you don't have an understanding of these four causes for anything in reality, if you basically, in some nihilistic sense or existential sense, just make meaning, and a human is plastic and can just be shaped into whatever they prefer for hedonistic or some other purpose, or to be true to themselves, whatever that means, then you get what we have today, I think, in most schools. And it makes young people ripe for oppression. It makes them ripe for dictatorial control because they actually have no sense of a grand narrative that's truer than the power that tries to control me, whether that's some kind of wrong appetite in me or an oppressor outside of me. They need something transcendent beyond that to be able to live free lives. And so the liberal arts were created to make a free people, a people who couldn't be oppressed, the kind of people who gave birth, to this country. And classical ed then is sometimes viewed as a patriotic endeavor in the United States in this renewal movement because we see in, say, the founding men of this country, this connection to the great conversation through these great books, through the Athens and Jerusalem and the philosophers I've mentioned. And they said, we're a great nation because we inherited these treasures from the past, and these men gave a new creation out of them in this democratic republic, this experiment that we're in.
I'm Todd Pringle, and this is the Crosswinds Institute podcast. My guest is Paul Fisher, headmaster of the Capstone Classical Academy. The decline of education in America is an ongoing tragedy and travesty. Resilience and excellence, they come from rigor, not coddling. So what is to be done? For some, the solution is the great books of Western civilization. And here in Fargo, educational renewal is underway as local donors have contributed more than $50 million to build a K-12 ecumenical school focused on a return to the classics. Hi, Paul.
Well, hi.
Hey, thanks.
It's good to see you in a new context.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, happy to be here.
The disclaimer, as always, the views expressed by the guest and host are at least our own and may or may not represent various organizations we might be affiliated with. We're just here to have a good conversation, a conversation I'm excited about. I'm interested in helping this project, this school, become wider known and to see which elements of the Crosswinds network have maybe never heard of the Capstone Academy. And in context, this school itself is a interesting contrast to public K-12 and the state of it, which is itself worthy of multiple podcasts for the various dimensions of the challenges and erosion of public education, wanting to understand why parents feel the need to explore other alternatives. The story behind this school is very interesting too, from both a parent and a community support element. And I think a lot of people have, a lot of people feel they understand like what's a Christian school. Some people truly get it because maybe they're actually involved in it or came from it. And then people have various, maybe reductive ideas of what that means. But this is, that's not just what Capstone is. This is also a classical academy. This is a classical education. And I think that people might have some vague idea what that means. But I really think that that's an area we want to explore pretty deep of exactly what that means. And that isn't what, this isn't your typical school. And I am, really excited about introducing it to this community that has these parts of this community that haven't heard of it. So let's get me quiet here if I can be, and just get into this. So what is the Capstone Classical Academy?
Well, you used a few key words. We're a classical school. We can get into that. And we're a Christian school. And that bears some explanation, too. That's a big word that means different things to different people. But we're a new school. We're 2 years in. Capstone's an entrepreneurial exercise, and it's one of local vision. I originated in Pennsylvania. The founders of the school are all from North Dakota, and eastern North Dakota at that. So it's a movement of local people to do something that they feel is timely and essential to the thriving of their local community. But it's a revival of something that's old. It's a renewal movement of sorts that Capstone finds itself in. And so it is a renewal of an older form of education. And in some ways, it's a renewal of a way of life that folks hope to pass on to their children and to revive in their communities. So it's not that it's Luddite or stuck in the past, but it grieves over some things that have been lost that maybe shouldn't have been and would be good for the future.
And that fits exactly, right in the sort of sweet spot of the conversations we're trying to drive, which is the loss of the central binding narratives of our civilization.
Right.
And what are those things we definitely want to both either preserve or reinforce / resurrect, and what are the things that are needing revivification, needing renewal, needing updating. And there is a sort of an interesting phenomenon happening. It is happening at different generations, but there's a sort of a return to tradition, but it's done with a different set of eyes. And I think that we have a real opportunity in our culture right now to recognize, based on what's happening all around us, that some decades ago, it seems that let's just say the general consensus leaned really heavy into new and modern, postmodern, and secular, and we viewed a lot of other things that would as traditions as either arbitrary or worse, oppressive.
Sure.
And in many parts of our institutions and in wide swaths of our culture and along many family lineages, we've basically abandoned those things. And I think the fruits of that effort, the wages of that effort are all around us with the state of our culture. And so you said that it's not a Luddite thing. This isn't about these new things are bad. This isn't put away your cell phones and let's return to the butter churn. But a return to the great books. We've got a couple thousand years here, pretty good run. This foundation seems to be pretty solid and has served us well. Maybe we should look again at some of these formative books, maybe in the thread that used to run through it. So classical education. I mean, what does that mean?
When people say the word classical, it's funny. Some people think that our school just teaches classical music, that we're like a school for musicians. And quite honestly, I think that's why some people haven't called
sad commentary on where we are.
Well, right. I mean, they haven't called the admissions office because, who likes classical music and what good is that today? That won't get you into the 21st century marketplace very successfully. So there's a lot of assumptions about what that means in terms of, so this is a school that doesn't like STEM and is into the arts. That's not really true. Neither of those things is particularly true or distinctive about our school or any classical school. But classical also means that, we're reading classic books. That's true. That's very true of our schools. How we define classic is probably defined by what has stayed for a long time. What have great minds of the past quoted or referenced regularly or drawn inspiration from? What are some of the roots from which we've really gotten life over the centuries? Ideological roots, moral roots, philosophical roots. And classical ultimately, though, means it goes back to the classical civilizations that we reference, Greece and Rome, Greece in particular. And the birth of the West in Athens and Jerusalem in particular is something that the classical school cares a lot about. We like to contextualize education in classical schools. I just read an article. I can't remember what the publication was. It was shared on LinkedIn by a head of school in Richmond, Virginia. And he was talking about the problems that Harvard's having right now in this kind of crisis moment for them, at least in the public eye. And
there's a lot of chickens coming home.
Exactly. Yeah, but a big part of it is that they've abandoned, so the liberal arts core, which isn't really liberal arts anymore at this school, has been truncated to eliminate historical context. And so they explore, kind of contemporary ideologies in these courses, totally severed from their origin and from the historic context.
Because all historical narratives are just written by oppressors to maintain their power structure.
Right. It's all a power struggle.
The cartoon version of what.
So, but that leaves these students without the ability to actually interpret anything rooted in reason or reality. It comes back to, you mentioned this kind of jettisoning of classics and so forth. I think that comes from this rise of self that Carl Trueman writes about, where there's this, out of Rousseau forward, there's this desire to actualize my authentic self. And the individualism that had become in vogue is now coming home to roost too. And you mentioned that lack of a common narrative by which we can make community together and build a future together peaceably and fruitfully. That's something.
How do you get to an authentic expression of self if you simultaneously jettison all of the narratives that gave context and actually established understood functional niches for these various ways of expression of yourself?
Yeah.
And worse, if you completely destroy it, pathologize it, and frame it as a pathology to abandon the narratives of what used to say who we are as a people, and then emphasize self-expression. I mean, what is the net result of that? It's self-expression unmoored without purpose, and that's what we have.
At the end, it's kind of, it leads to despair, right? And so there's plenty of people writing now and plenty of research being done on where's all this despair coming from in people's lives. All
of this ramification of self-expression without functional utility in that expression. So you are leading a life that you sort of define, and you define it on sort of either hedonistic terms or some sort of construal, and it's not nested in a thing that people need and care about in society. And so you're filling some sort of role, in some cases a whole cloth imagined role, or some new type identity. But if it doesn't have a purpose in society, so to speak, why are you doing that? It's not going to give you the kind of satisfaction, because what are you doing for your community? And so the despair, and I should be careful. I'm not saying that various forms of say novel identity therefore equal despair. It's that they don't by themselves produce the meaning that comes from serving your in-group, being an integral, recognized, having an integral functional niche for your people.
And that's a bridge too. So the classical education model comes out of Greece philosophically. The trivium, the quadrivium, these are the liberal arts that people generally refer to liberal arts and don't know what they are. But we can unpack that some. But the idea of virtue is something that certainly didn't originate with Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, but they certainly gave a very poignant expression and framework for how we think about virtue. But virtue, according to Augustine and those guys and the scriptures, the Christian and Judaic scriptures, they look at virtue as something that happens only in relationship, right, to one another or to your community. And the classical Christian school views it as, okay, virtue and wisdom are the reason education exists. We can draw from this rich tradition that gives meaning and purpose and has given birth to Western civilization, all the good that we see in it. And we want to make sure that our young people are connected to those roots, and they understand that virtue isn't an idea. It's something that's lived and expressed in the context of community. And your meaning in life comes from community, because to us, God, who is Trinity, exists in community. That's a mystery. in himself, he is three and one, and he communes. And so even the most powerful being on earth he is self-sufficient, but in the sense that he's in relationship with Father, Son, Spirit. Virtue is practiced then within that relationship. And so all meaning in life, we would believe, and so did the pagans, before Christendom, believed through the Greek philosophers in particular, that virtue was a path to freedom and fulfillment. But it's hard to have virtue when you lose any sense of the transcendent. And so the classical schools tend to talk about the good, the true, and the beautiful. And we mean those as objective realities that we can debate about, but there is a right answer as to what's truly beautiful and what's truly good and what's true. And so classical schools hold to that objective, transcendent pursuit. That's unique in today's context. So, some would say, well, no, we have that. I believe the science, that was very popular in recent years.
The term believe in science
is interesting.
It's interesting.
So it's
problematic, you might say.
There's more than, in the classical school, there's more than the material, and so whether you're a Christian classical school or some kind of secular classical school, because there's both, you can have a classical school that's not particularly Christian, but they will believe in something bigger than the self because they're rooted in the transcendent tradition, or the tradition of the pursuit of transcendent things, or the good. If nothing else, classical schools are after what is the good life? How can human flourishing happen? And they go about answering those questions differently depending on whether they've got a particular theology or philosophy or not. But if you want to contrast it to the other kinds of schools that are available, Neil Postman wrote a book called The End of Education. People might be more familiar with Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is maybe his most popular book, or Technopoly, which is as relevant today as it was before the internet when it was written. And so he wrote this book and he said, look, all education serves a God of some kind or it's ineffective. There has to be a narrative that everyone believes in.
Has to be a value framework or you won't get
And so what happens in most schools today is that, well, at least I would have said maybe 5 years ago that economic utility is the God that education serves. And so you would hear politicians say things like, we've got to give money to schools and we've got to improve things so that they can find their place in the global marketplace or 21st century economy.
And that's the framing why is it time regimented? Why, making good factory workers or good whatever.
Right. It's utility.
Yep.
Utility. Yeah. It's an economics game. It's making sure that all of the citizens fit into the machine.
Yeah, and certainly we've got you could certainly, I don't know if that framing would be accurate for at least a century, but
yes, at least more than a century, industrial revolution at least forward.
Sure,
and so now you've got this contrast between a school that's saying, well, we should have this rigorous and vigorous pursuit of things that are transcendent, that give meaning and context to our productivity and orient and direct us ethically and otherwise. We should do that, and that should be what we're about. And wisdom is knowing when I ought to do things. Not because I can create a technology or because I can use it doesn't mean that I'm prepared to, morally, ethically, from a wisdom standpoint. And so there's a sense of you can't have wisdom unless you understand all of the causes of the matter that you live around. Aristotle talked about these 4 causes, which he didn't mean as like cause and effect, not all of them anyways. But there's this material cause. What's reality made of? What's this mug made of? The material, the atoms that it's composed of, the elements, and then this idea that there's also, in addition to the material, what's the second one after material? Formal. It's the formal cause. What form? What shape is it in? And so one illustration I've heard is an apple. An apple, if you look at it, you define it by its shape often. You can define it by its elements. But if I mash it up into a pulp, it's no longer an apple. I might have apple juice. The elements are the same, but the form is lost. And he says, to understand truth or knowledge, you have to know its material cause, its formal cause, its efficient cause. Where did it come from? This is the cause and effect idea. Where did the apple come from? It came from a seed. Where did the seed come from? And so forth. And if you go back in time, Aristotle says indefinitely you're going to find another cause, another cause, another cause from the efficient cause standpoint. So you got material cause, formal cause, efficient cause. And the final cause is the one that I think classical schools are really interested in. The final cause is, okay, so what's the prime mover? It doesn't go on indefinitely. There's a prime mover. And that yields purpose or tell us, like, what's the end or the purpose of this thing? And if you think about education that way, as Plato did, the Republic's probably maybe the best work on education if people would recognize that Plato's still relevant, he has something to say. But the end of education ultimately then for us is well, what were humans made for? It comes down to like our anthropology. And in classical education, from a Christian perspective, the human anthropology of a created being made in the image of its creator in some way that theologians debate and talk about, that purpose contextualizes everything. It animates it, informs it, it guides and directs it, gives meaning and purpose to it, puts restraints on it. But if you don't have an understanding of these four causes for anything in reality, if you basically, in some nihilistic sense or existential sense, just make meaning, and a human is plastic and can just be shaped into whatever they prefer for hedonistic or some other purpose, or to be true to themselves, whatever that means, then you get what we have today, I think, in most schools. And it makes young people ripe for oppression. It makes them ripe for dictatorial control because they actually have no sense of a grand narrative that's truer than the power that tries to control me, whether that's some kind of wrong appetite in me or an oppressor outside of me. They need something transcendent beyond that to be able to live free lives. And so the liberal arts were created to make a free people, a people who couldn't be oppressed, the kind of people who gave birth, to this country. And classical ed then is sometimes viewed as a patriotic endeavor in the United States in this renewal movement because we see in, say, the founding men of this country, this connection to the great conversation through these great books, through the Athens and Jerusalem and the philosophers I've mentioned. And they said, we're a great nation because we inherited these treasures from the past, and these men gave a new creation out of them in this democratic republic, this experiment that we're in. So people view us as sometimes a political kind of organization, but all schools are political organizations. Well,
now everything can be framed that way. If you take any kind of stand whatsoever, it seems like in our present environment, you're going to have some people who are going to be.
That's a long, rambling explanation of classical ed, but it gets at how multifaceted it is.
You were talking about, one way or another, your education is going to serve some kind of God, so to speak.
Right.
And I grew up listening to a lot of criticisms of public education as, all we're doing is making factory workers, that sort of thing, that this sort of practical value of why is it time regimented? Why do you sit in rows? Why do you do this? Why are you teaching these basic things? It was sort of corporate America offloading to the taxpayers the costs of educating a good factory drone kind of thing. That's sort of the cynical view of it. And oftentimes that framing was used to then advocate for, we don't teach creativity or we don't teach this or that. And so then there's always various initiatives to try to do some sort of pedagogy change. But it seems to me that more recently, the sort of what is the ultimate functional utility of K through 12, it doesn't seem as much like we're trying to make good factory drones, so to speak, or good office drones, so to speak. It seems like there's a new ideological push within that a lot of people are some people like, and a lot of people are frankly very alarmed about, and in my opinion, good reason to be alarmed for that. But because the ideologies that appear to be being promulgated in a lot of the K-12 areas, they don't exactly have 2,000 years of or more of coherent narrative nesting them in like all of the sort of implicit framing and explicit framing of who we are as people. A lot of these things are quite new,
right.
And sort of floating frameworks, if you like, But I wonder if if we lean into this framing of you're just making factory drones and then you're just making office drones, that criticism was often at a time in which church attendance was a hell of a lot higher, and
right.
What is my purpose? What is it that I'm supposed to do? What is it? What is a good person? Your axiomatic assumptions you walk around with. You didn't need your kindergarten teacher to tell you those things, and it seems to me that that criticism of offloading of labor education for large companies is a fair reductive framing, but now that we are in the secular became the dominant factor, so much so that the non-secular had to sort of go into a kind of sort of stealth mode within the civic world, the tamp down of performatively Christian things, and then it became this quiet thing, whether it's at school or at work or wherever, and then you got a void. You've got these things that all of our, whether you want to talk cultural, sociobiological, sociocultural evolution, we have these. We need to know what is our purpose. We need a framing of value for all of our interactions and why we take one foot in front of the other. And the more that erodes in the explicit form, we're going to be seeking it somewhere else. And it seems like that we're now using public schools as a place to introduce ideological framing. And I'm not even getting into the specific ideology. I'm not.
Well, it's definitely not a passing on of a heritage or a way of life.
Yeah.
The Greek word for that's paideia, and it's more than just a curriculum. It's passing on a way of life. And it includes things like a sense of piety. In many ways, classical ed begins with piety. It's a sense of duty to family, to community, to God, perhaps, to something outside of yourself, right? And without piety, the rest of it, there's no humility for the student, right? Piety creates a sense of humility in which the student says, I'm here to learn, and it's because I'm part of something bigger than me, and I receive with gratitude and humility what those who are teaching me and have come before me have discovered, have tried and found true, and I'm blessed, and I'm actually privileged to receive it. And so that there's no sense of that coming into a school in the general secular sense today or in the public sense. At a minimum, patriotism provided that before.
Right.
So in the 1950s, when the Supreme Court decided we've got to have a bigger wall here, a more impenetrable wall between church and state in the school, you removed things like scripture from the public school and prayer from the public school, which may have been the right decision in a pluralistic nation. But of course, the end result of that is you have to have that. Now we've toppled the highest level of authority for our narrative, the author of it, and now you've got patriotism. Well, in today's era, where we're starting to really in the schools kind of look at only the sins, as it were, of our forefathers,
for sure,
and not any of the virtue.
Very presentist.
So we're not, and now that brings patriotism into question. Should we even like our country? And once you start dismantling all of those, now you could say, well, we should dismantle it, but the question would be then, well, what narrative do you put in its place? What the hell are you
replacing it with?
Right, because otherwise, a child. I mean, think about the sophistication of a child, the needs of a child. No one's giving them any answer as to what this is about. And when you hear things like "look within yourself," I mean, maybe we can't remember. I'm pushing 50. Maybe I can't remember what it was like to be a child, and nobody ever said to me, "Hey, figure it out for yourself. It's within. The answer's within you." And so. Wow. And there's no boundaries, you can create anything. And so that's where we find ourselves today. So why do parents look at a model like a classical school and say, hey, that's really appealing to me? It largely is coming from parents looking around and saying, I feel like we're untethered, and I want my child tethered to something that will help them make it to adulthood whole, and that they'll live honorably. I want them to have a sense of what honor is. I want them to have a moral compass, a moral imagination that's developed well, according to what's actually good and true.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm going to try to inhibit rants as much as I can, and I'll probably fail a couple times. I think I'm about
You're in good company.
Fail. Yeah. There's a lot of criticism, and I guess I should frame this because we are having a conversation about what I want to have a conversation a lot about what a classical education is, but we cannot because of what Capstone is, and nor should we feel we have to decouple it from the Christian framing, and this podcast isn't supposed to be about my journey, but I grew up formerly religious and confirmed, but as a teenager, I became an atheist, and you and I have talked a lot, and I've been secular and cynical, and I have all the scripts in my mind when, as you're talking just now, where some years ago, I would have said, yeah, but your system is oppressive. Yeah, but
right.
Yours, here's all these examples in which, in the name of God, in the name of Christ, or whatever, all this shitty stuff happened to people, and so therefore your solution is a retro solution, and we needed to have something that works for everybody. Now I won't say it that way anymore. I view it differently and more complexly. Mm-hmm. Anytime there's people, there's going to be corruption, and there's going to be misinterpretation, and there's going to be all sorts of stuff. But I just set that aside. What I'd like some people that might be hearing this that are already, that are deeply secular or overtly atheist, and are caricaturing this effort as, oh yeah, they're saying all this stuff, Plato, yada yada, Aristotle, yada yada, but what they're really trying to do is Bible bang and make a bunch of Jesus drones, or whatever cynical framing you want to have. But I would like those people that might be listening to this, and maybe you're thinking about turning it off, is just, what the hell is the alternative that's out there right now? What have we done? And how is, and it's not what you say, it's what you do, and the thing is what it does. And what is the state of our society right now? Why do we have an epidemic of fentanyl? Is it just because we have a porous border, or that China makes precursors? I mean, does that create the demand? Why do we have an epidemic of suicide? Why is suicide a modern phenomenon? I mean, take away, there's like religious aspects, and there's
but the suicide of despair.
The suicide of despair, the suicide of nihilism in the context of material abundance. Mm-hmm. Our high fructose corn syrup surplus world, everything you want.
Yeah.
If you have the fortune of good health, if you and your loved ones have the fortune of good health, and we institutionalize and sort of hide aging away. We sort of hide from death in our cultural constructions and all that, and we have this sort of zone of many decades where you can live. If tragedy doesn't strike you, you're just a pampered zoo animal at that point in everything you need, and yet we have the sense of despair, sense of hopelessness, the amount of medication, whether it's prescribed medication that seems to often create more problems than it solves, and then the off-label, and then the various forms of liquid and other types of medication in terms of alcoholism and drugs, pornography, all vices and distractions. With a lot of people that are miserable without purpose, and we know that people can be physically miserable. People can go through all sorts of difficult pain and strife and tragedy and other things, but be focused, like a laser beam on something meaningful and purposeful. And yet we have our comfortable, pampered existence, and we're miserable. So that's what we've created. That's what it seems to me anyway, that's the fruits, the wages of our deconstruction. And before one discounts looking back at tradition, before one rejects it because you have a label for it as oppressive, right, or because historically it hasn't fit everybody, or because historically, because it involves humans, we've had in-group, out-group behavior, and at the end of the day, we're talking apes. We tend to be pretty mean to out-groups, and we tend to use our narratives and norm enforcement in nasty ways. And pick your ideology, pick your community, pick your sort of sense of group narrative. We've been cruel to people that aren't fitting into that, and people that are on the borders of that, and that's a universal.
Well, and the challenge then, I think, is how do you, for us, I lead a Christian classical school, and one of our greatest, I won't use the word fear, certainly one of the things that we're working against is to create a kind of fundamentalist, enforce my Christian norms, dogmatism that's unthinking or that's seeking to maintain control or power. This is not, a good classical Christian school is not it's not a power grab at all, because at the end of the day, what we're doing as a classical Christian school is saying, okay, we're learning ultimately truth, goodness, and beauty from the teachings and person of Jesus Christ as kind of preeminent in our school. And this is a man, a God man, if you will, who decides that the best way for him to live his life is to basically give it, to everyone but himself. A man who empties himself in order to fulfill his own telos, and then says to us, and one of his great apostles, Paul, says the way to actually live an abundant life is to lose your life. It's true that plenty of human beings, because of we're just born in vice, plenty of human beings have thought, what can I take from Christ that will benefit me without actually being his follower, which would cost me everything. So I can take what looks advantageous to me and then use it to oppress others or build a comfortable life for myself.
Sure. Yeah.
But we can all look at people like Mother Teresa and others who have lived this example of true discipleship to Christ, and what they do is they give of whatever it is that they've been given for a cause bigger than their own ego and their own comfort, many times losing their own comfort for something that's of greater joy and substance. You could look at the story of Corrie ten Boom in The Hiding Place, where they're hiding Jews in Nazi Germany as Christians and end up in concentration camps, and she maintains her faith and her joy and finds fulfillment in loss because she's virtuous. She's doing what she's been made for. That final, cause that Aristotle talks about, she found. And if there's a sense of self-actualization as, which I don't really ascribe to, but if there's a sense of self-actualization as a human living the intended purpose, and if you believe you're created, then you believe in an intended purpose, and it's the Creator's purpose. In the Christian classical school, that is service to others, surrender of self for what would be God glorifying or would reflect the intent of the Creator. But also he designs for your greatest joy and satisfaction. So we believe that our students will defy the negative Christian stereotype and will become people that are easy to love in the sense that they're good neighbors. They allow me to live the way we talk these days. They allow me to live my personal truth, right, without trying to force their faith upon me. But they live virtuous lives in such a way that I can't help but be somewhat drawn to them. Regardless, because our students they may have that winsome personality. They may be great, selfless neighbors. At the end of the day, though, they're probably going to proclaim some things as absolutely true and good and beautiful. And that's where people will say, wait, stop.
Yep.
I don't want to hear that you have, you're rendering some judgment on what I believe. And that's hateful today, in the way we think about it today. If I disagree with you,
right,
and I tell you and I present my argument, even if I do it as graciously as possible, I could be accused of hate
speech
for having a problem with your propositional truth. And what we're doing in a classical school is teaching logic and rhetoric as formal courses. All classical schools do this. And we make them kind of almost an integrating core of the content. So faith is there, but logic and rhetoric are there. And the idea is that you've got to learn to construct rational arguments and know how to recognize an argument that's not rational. But you've also got to learn how to communicate in such a way that someone would actually receive it. Understand your audience, care about even their preferences. How can I best reach them and not be an offense or a stumbling block to them discovering something that I've discovered that I think is really valuable? It is a love of neighbor that the classical Christian education graduate is going to propel them to be winsome in an argument and to not say, okay, fine, have your truth if I think that your truth might be actually harmful to you. And so it would be hateful for me to not engage in that dialogue. My concern is that whether you're a Christian, agnostic, an atheist, a Buddhist, a Hindu, whatever perspective you're coming from, if we can't engage in those conversations, because we all agree, and we do, whether we want to admit it or not, we do agree in moral absolutes. I mean, everybody does. Nobody can talk about a moral system or lack of a moral system without getting offended at you being wrong about your moral system.
The irony or hypocrisy or I don't know, rich incongruity of it all is when somebody that with a Christian framing or otherwise is making a value judgment, or stating that from the way they see the world, these things are objectively true, or this thing is a good, this thing is not a good. The labeling of that is hate, and even the labeling of that is violence. This attempt to redefine words as violence, or in some cases even worse than physical violence, depending upon the context. To say that you proclaiming something as an objective good that runs counter to me, for me to say to you that that's hateful, that's a deeply offensive thing. You've done damage to me. You've done violence with your words to me, by essentially, believing in something. Well, what the hell did I just do to you? What is a norm? I'm norm enforcing. I'm saying you've broken my value framework, and you're a bad person for it. Yeah. And the irony, is it irony, of one shouldn't define norms, and that's our biggest norm. Yep. That we will absolutely not tolerate intolerance kind of thing. And I'm not the first person to see this kind of.
No, it's jumping off the page at us on a regular basis, but it's a self-serving. It is in a sense living out the worldview that we're coming from. So in this postmodern deconstructivist kind of worldview, where language is to be kind of like created and shaped to control. And
all language is used by the power structure, so I might as well use it to enforce my power structure.
So you just kind of adopt it. It's your worldview, and you just kind of adopt it and manipulate it for your own cause. You live into the evil that you've identified about the oppressor because you have no choice but to become that person. And that runs so contrary to all of the wisdom, and I would believe that it's wisdom. I'd have somebody debate me on it. It'd be enjoyable, but of the ages that we've been building civilization upon. It's the very, so we had slavery here in the United States, and it was the very ideals of those who came before that helped us to break free of that slavery. In the moment, we're always we're human beings. The way Scripture talks about it is that we invent ways of doing evil. We're always going to come up with new ways. And the thing that draws us back to repent, if you will, to rethink an unjust society, are those things that have been somewhat timeless. It's not as though every idea that preceded an evil was the cause of that evil. Their evil rises up in rebellion against previous good. And then that previous good has to be recalled to bring into the present, to wage war with the evil that interrupted. And so to look back at whether it's the American tradition or Western tradition or Christian tradition or Islamic tradition or whatever you want to point to, and say that the whole thing must be written off
Right.
as oppressive.
Including the words like good and evil, including the
Right.
conceptualization.
I think it's going a step too far, and it cuts the legs out from underneath the good that one purportedly wants to accomplish by writing it off.
Yeah.
And
You're standing on a sound building, and you found some errors in the manuals of say the civil engineering of the foundation and the construction techniques.
Right.
You found some things you considered problematic, and so you're literally living and standing on this building, which is to say all of the cultural constructions that are working, that have produced this material abundant world, that have produced this level of consistency and have reduced uncertainty, so that we can go through our lives and have a good chance of actually living a full and productive life and not having a brutal short existence. All of these civilizational foundations, they were built on wisdom, they were built on knowledge. And a whole cloth abandonment as the post-structural kind of at the end of the day, these are all just words, and they're at some level meaningless, and all meta narratives are inconsistent. So let's chuck them all out because they're all power structures. But at the same time, I know I'm a good person, and so I'll impose my own sort of meta narrative with sort of a wink at it. And I'll just want to stop all of the old style meta. I mean, you're throwing out the construction manuals. You're throwing out these things and intelligence is largely a collective phenomenon. There's implicit wisdom in things. There's implicit framing of things. The life is way more complicated than any one talking ape brain can manage. And we're throwing out all the implicit part. We're throwing out the stuff that is embodied in a tradition. Those traditions themselves have been, they have been through their own kind of process of filtering and evolution, in the sense that if they weren't stable and productive and generative and worth passing on, they wouldn't have been, because every time that they're expressed, they're slightly mildly iterated in ways, because we're all humans and we don't quite know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so if you had various traditions, and those traditions I would extend that to also be, if you have certain narratives, certain stories, we just keep telling each other.
Yeah.
Every time, especially in verbal traditions, but even in physical traditions, every time you're doing them, you might be cutting a corner or adding a little flourish or whatever.
Yeah.
And once in a while, maybe that flourish becomes something that stays in the lineage. But a lot of times those flourishes just disappear, and there's a core. Well, if that is a tradition or a story that just keeps coming back, there's a reason, and all of our sort of implicit assumptions about how the world works.
Yeah.
Depend on those things. So,
right.
and we've basically not only said they're arbitrary or they're built from power structures, but also on top of that, other than that they're used for oppression. Other than that, there's silly, arbitrary, incoherent stuff. And we're adults now. Let's abandon it. Okay, and let's just get our crayons and rewrite how the whole world works. With our new narratives, and we get the absolute chaos that we have right now. Sorry, ranting again. I actually do think it would be good to get some nuts and bolts here about the Capstone.
But you've covered
Classical
the
Academy.
philosophical foundations here, so that was probably helpful.
That's part of ultimately the conversation that we're trying to drive here is binding narratives. But there are people out there with small children, or people out there thinking of starting a family in the future, and there's people who have done well in life and are always looking at philanthropically where they can make the biggest difference. So some nuts and bolts here about the Capstone Classical Academy, like what grades does it serve? How big is it? If you could kind of walk through so I know the origin story is very interesting, but just sort of start with on a practical level.
Sure.
And then I'll add questions as we go.
So we operate today. We're in our second academic year. The idea started in 2020, and the school launched in August of 22 with students. So about a 2-year run up to opening. The school serves through 7th grade. We have a pre-K that's 4-year-olds. Those are just a morning class that students can take, 5 days, 3 days, 2 days. Parents can choose. But we have that pre-K class, which is just pre-numeracy, pre-literacy, learning the social game of school, How do I function in a team and so forth? That's pre-K. And then we offer then kindergarten through 7th grade. Currently, that 7th grade class will be our first graduating class in 2029. And so it just gets, moved up the ladder as we go towards senior year. The school was founded with very generous support, and it allowed us to open as a mature school by hiring and recruiting veterans, by getting veteran leadership, by making certain that we could offer the full spectrum of the program, whether we had one.
By veteran, do you mean people experienced in teaching
yes,
Classical Academy?
thank you. Yes,
Not necessarily.
Good clarification.
Marines.
Right now I don't have any actual military vets on faculty, I don't think. But yeah, veterans to the role of teaching and administrating, leading a school, all of those things. So everybody was new together as a team, but they weren't new to the work, and I think that was essential to be able to afford
new to the work.
that.
You don't mean they taught 2nd grade in public school. You mean they're new. They at least a core of them knew what a classical and Christian education.
Right. Yeah.
was.
Some of us did. Many did not.
Yeah, okay.
And what you look for in a classical school is let's get somebody who's got the right worldview and disposition to embrace the model. There would be those who would be opposed to the notion. Obviously, we can't hire them just because they're trained teachers. We might actually have some significant differences about what we think makes a good teaching method or pedagogy and what makes good curriculum. So we have to hire people who buy in or can be easily persuaded through the research process for them learning about our school. But the idea of a teacher who's maybe taught for 7 or 8 years in a local public kindergarten coming into our school is not problematic at all if that person lives life within the framework that classical ed is designed and delivered. And we find those people. You can learn a lot teaching kindergarten in the public school for 7 or 8 years that transfers perfectly into a classical school. So yeah, public school teachers are great candidates for us if they themselves chafe at the model that they're in. If they're quite comfortable and they think it's working swimmingly, they probably wouldn't want to be in a classical school. So you find people with the right disposition, and to attract great people, though, requires paying them competitively. And the support we received in the community early on made it possible for us to hire people who honestly could compete for good pay somewhere else. And every parent who sends their child to a school wants to know that you got the best when you went looking for teachers. That doesn't happen for a new school unless somebody's investing early. Because we committed to opening pre-K through 6th grade. And I said, if we have one student in 6th grade, we'll offer 6th grade, because people backed us financially and said, this school needs to happen. We're going to fund it. No matter how many students you get, the bills will be paid for your great teachers. Go find them, get them hired. Let's not drive 30 miles an hour. Let's go 60. Let's get it done. That's why I moved to Fargo, because I could see these people were serious about making this vision a reality and were willing to give and get others to come on board and give to make it possible. So it's taken off faster than what is typical.
And the community financial support for this is amazing. It's
remarkable.
It is. To me, it's a national level story. What people in this community, because they saw it as a good,
right?
Because this wasn't this was greenfield.
Sure.
This was built upon a shared vision of what could be and quite ambitious, and it garnered a great deal of financial support. It's truly impressive.
Yeah.
And astounding, and heartening. That people would put that amount of many tens of millions of dollars to make this happen.
Into a nonprofit for children, right? For young people in this community.
Yep.
And all the dollars were local.
And I would, I would suspect a lot of the larger donors probably were at an age where they didn't have small children anymore.
That's right.
And they're talking about not just their grandchildren, but just this community's children. So at a practical, continue on the practical here. K through 7 right now. about how many students and roughly how many per grade right now, and
Sure.
and then kind of walk
Yeah.
into, are you progressing? Like, what would you see for growth for the next?
We
several years?
started with 174 students at the beginning of this school year. That was up from 116 at the beginning of last school year. I'd hoped to open with 60 last school year, and we hit 116. So I was really pleasantly surprised that people understood that the vision was something that actually did fit this community and fit what we were hearing as we were talking in feasibility conversations in the early going. That we're going to be adding second sections now. So we're one classroom deep, kindergarten through 7th grade. But in the fall of 24, we're adding a second kindergarten, a second first grade, a second grade classroom.
Awesome. Okay.
The demand is there. We'll see how full that class will be.
So, like right now, how big is your like first grade class?
We cap at 20 students.
Okay.
We've got a few that have 21.
Okay.
Usually,
that's a structural cap that you're you're okay.
We view 20 as kind of an optimum in the early grades where you're building the foundational reasoning and skills in literacy and math. That's it, right? Everything else kind of builds on top of those two. So we have 2 teachers in the classroom for those. So you've got a 1-to-10 ratio there.
Okay.
So there's 20 students.
Okay.
But the aide that we hire is often going to be a teacher candidate who we hope to move into a classroom in the future, and then we'll get another aide to
excellent.
come
Okay.
in. But it gives us a chance to test drive an individual, gives them a chance to learn the curriculum, learn the methods, and then to see if that's something they want to do. But one of the things that I think distinguishes us is that we pay that aide like teachers often get paid in other private schools. We respect the role that they have, and we treat them as an educator in the room, not a paraprofessional or something. And that's through 2nd grade, and then we do it as needed in the other grades. So you pay attention to the needs in a classroom, and you adjust your adult power in the classroom or numbers in the classroom based on the needs in the room. And of course, we do that. The goal is you do what the students need to fulfill the vision for your alumni. If it costs a certain dollar amount to do that, then it costs that amount to do that. We don't really have a scarcity mindset, and we're not actually concerned about price. We just believe you build what the vision is, and then you show people the excellence of it, ask them to support it to make it accessible for families for whom excellence gets out of their price range, because that happens. But you can't say, well, let's just bag the vision because that's not the price bracket our community's in. So why start the school,
So as a parent, what does this cost to send a kid there, and how much of that how much are you getting from, are they paying half versus what's been?
So if we were to charge full price to a family right now, that's about $10,000 for the grammar school program. That's K through 6th grade for a year.
Okay.
Yep. And that varies. I think it's at 94.9 this year.
Okay.
And then it's maybe 10.5 for like junior high. It does get a little bit more expensive as you get older. The high school's more expensive. We're not open yet at the high school level. Mm-hmm. But we do show families our high school pricing for this year, even though it doesn't exist, so that they know, when my child gets to high school, it's going to cost X amount more. I think it's $12,000 something right now if we had high school open. Of course, 2 years from now, it'll be more than that. But the goal is to always project for our families 5 years out. So we've done that. The last 2 years, we give a new 5-year forecast. The tuition this year was what we said it would be a year ago for next year. We do long-term strategic plans so that families can plan strategically. And we don't really look at the other schools and say, well, what are they charging? What could we charge? Yeah. We look at what needs to be delivered to the students, and then we charge what it takes to make that happen. The goal is fulfill the promise of the school, and no smoke and mirrors to make it cheaper and pretend we're still getting excellence. But at the end of the day, the school has to be heavily endowed to support scholarships for families that can't afford full price. There are 53 of our 174 students who are on some kind of tuition support program, whether that's individual sponsorships, because there are families that say, I'll sponsor a child, I'll sponsor 2 children, and they're paying full tuition for children they don't know. Typically, I'll say, well, is there a particular kind of need you're looking to meet or a profile that you're looking to serve? And someone might say, yeah, I want to help a single parent household that comes to you in the admissions process and can't afford it. And so we've got those. And in 2 cases, the families said, hey, we'll pay through graduation. They're in 5th grade now. I want to pay till they're through their senior year. And they're making those kinds of commitments because they, like us, we know what it costs to deliver this thing, but we also don't want it to be exclusive for only families who have a certain earning potential. And getting this campus built, our permanent campus, which is under construction, debt-free is essential to making sure that tuition isn't inflated by overhead from that. But it's also essential to being able to turn all of our supporters' attention to accessibility for families that want it.
Right.
So that's a scholarship program. It's need-based. And so far, we've been able to meet all needs in scholarship applications.
Oh, excellent.
But that's 53 students. What happens when we've got 540 students in a full building and that 53 becomes 200, right? And so we've got a challenge to meet those needs.
So is that 540 what? So there's a building under construction, and when that is done in full, it's about is that 540?
It'll be 540.
Okay, and that will be
pre-K through 12th grade.
Okay, so if we said and you guys started by sort of renting space?
Right, we leased some space on 25th Street South that's owned by Northview Church. It's not their church building, it's an office building that we remodeled and leased from them. And then we purchased a building on the corner of 25th Street and 40th Avenue South in Fargo, and on 6 acres there. It used to be, I think, a Methodist church, and then there was a Pentecostal church meeting in there. So we have remodeled that building and opened in that building as well. So we have 2 sites that we have now, and then we have a 3rd site that we're going to need to secure for the fall until we move into the new building in January of 25. Well, we start classes in January of 25 in the new building. So we'll be moving in December. But the growth is forcing us to find a 3rd site, and we think we'll have it on 25th Street in the same half mile.
Okay.
So we should be close. We call 25th Street the hallway. So that's where we are right now. It is a controlled growth. So last year we accepted 66% of the applicants for admission.
Okay.
And that was partially due, we have space constraints, but it's partially due to culture making. So if you enroll too many families too fast for any and every reason, then you end up diluting what you've created.
Right.
And there needs to be a potency to culture. Culture is largely what educates the student. And so we want a diverse culture in terms of maybe ethnic background, religious background, and so forth, socioeconomic level, all of those things. That's fine. That's good. It enhances the education. But what we can't have is parents coming because they're running away from the discipline at another school, or they're coming because they're angry at the administration at some other school because they don't know how to have conflict resolution, or whatever the issue is.
They're not necessarily coming because they see the vision of a classical academy.
Or like my kids' friends are coming here and we all play hockey together. And it might work out, but our goal is to, in the family.
You want the critical mass.
Right. And that interview process.
And some inertia to that mass.
We ask the question, what are your deep hopes for your child? I want to understand what you really desire. When at the end of the day, when all's said and done, what would be the worst thing that could be neglected, in your child, or what would be the worst deficiency, and what would be the greatest strength or asset they would gain from going here? What is? Have you even thought about that? And sometimes they haven't. They think, well, I want my child to be happy. Well, let's unpack that a little bit.
That's a postmodern
That statement. Process is ultimately so that we know you'll be satisfied with what you received, so your child isn't traumatized by multiple school changes. Right? And also so that you will come in and feel like you and the other parents are all pulling in the same direction. There aren't a lot of folks working against you culturally. And I hear, an audience hearing me say working against you culturally, and it's like, well, you just want this homogenous kind of, and you look at the 2 of us, well, what kind of culture is that, Mr. Fisher? But what we mean by that is this a group of people that believes in pursuing transcendent good? If so, then this is going to be a good fit for you.
In the recognition that, I want my kid to be happy. What the hell does that mean? And I always struggle with the pronunciation of hedonic. The long-lasting sense of satisfaction in terms of bifurcating how we should bifurcate happiness. in terms of long lasting versus short term. And eudaimonic,
I don't know.
But the
Get somebody smarter than me.
and it is just one of those terms that just never phonetically sticks. But this term happy, and we want people to be happy. But we've got to recognize as a culture that at least means two things, and just to dichotomize, which is itself too much of a reduction. But do we actually mean the temporary sense of joy, the temporary sense
right.
of pleasure, the short term, hedonic bliss of it's that life is good, it's a good
yep. day,
I'm happy. Or do we mean the long-lasting satisfaction of, yes, I'm doing what I'm in a good place. I have a role. I feel good about that.
Yep.
No.
Sense of purpose, belonging, some resiliency that comes from having that kind of character.
And what do you want for your kid? Do you want your kid to walk around in a state of blissful joy while they have a VR thing
right.
on their head and chemicals going into their veins, or do you want them to maybe have a pain in their lumbar disc and issues with their vision in their left eye and some other stuff, but man, they are so deeply rooted in a sense of purpose and mission that's bigger than them, that actually is impactful. You as a parent know the difference between doing something purposeful and meaningful that involved a whole hell of a lot of struggle, strife, burdens to carry, what have you, versus short-term happiness. And yet we use this term, and I want my kid to be happy. It's like, stop.
Well, you run across parents all the time that are concerned because their child isn't happy for a season. They come home sad. And it's like, well, golden opportunity. And it might be okay for them to linger in that sadness a little bit, maybe sit with them and love them in the midst of it, but don't try to medicate it too quickly with whatever you might want to use. And I don't mean just a prescription, right. but whatever kind of diversion
sometimes
or salve you want to put on it.
Not the thing that you need.
Yeah. So there's a deep desire in the classical Christian school Renewal to help young people to find true joy, which is rooted not in circumstance, right? Because we can't control those things. Joy is learning. You have to learn what it's like to be out of control and feel well. And I don't mean out of personal control of your own will, or your own actions, but out of control of your environment. Very powerful people cede control to others for the sake of a greater good and still have joy, or to circumstance. The striving to control and keep everything comfortable and make sure that everything works out well for my child and that they've got the perfect resume and all of these things so that they'll be successful, so that. At the end of the day, the question is, so what? And the classical school parent will have an answer either in the midst of being formulated, but they can't quite put words to it. But you'll see this restlessness with the status quo, and they'll say, I want something deeper for my child. I want something lasting. Sometimes they'll say things like, I would just want them to get their world turned right side up because the one I see their peers in is upside down. And, they may not be a Christian. They may not be. We have our schools tend to do very well with conservative Muslim families. They do really well with agnostic families who are agnostic because they're actually concerned about what's true. They don't want to just drink whatever Kool-Aid has been passed around. And so they're in a season of doubt or skepticism where they want to be careful. That's not at odds with the classical education at all. And I think some particularly evangelical Protestant, more fundamentalist Christian schools would be a difficult place for someone to be if they came from a different worldview than we do. Because to work at this school, you're going to have a historic Christian worldview. We'll use the term biblical worldview sometimes, so it even kind of expresses that we find a little bit of an anchor in the way that the scriptures articulate the way the world works. And so that group of people, though, in a classical school is welcoming of those who may come from a different worldview. We recognize the opportunity that's there for us to learn from one another what is true. Because, I'm a Protestant, I have a Catholic teacher that I work with that we're not a Protestant school. We're not a
So what
denominational school.
talk about that a little bit. What does that actually mean?
We call ourselves conservatively ecumenical. And so
What does ecumenical mean?
ecumenical means we embrace all historic Christian traditions.
Okay.
And so you could be Orthodox, you could be Catholic, you could be Protestant and find a place at Capstone as a teacher, as a student.
Sure. What does conservative mean in this case?
And conservative, though, it gets back to what we're saying about postmodernity and words. And I think for us, conservative means, well, we believe in transcendent or objective truth, goodness, and beauty. And so if the Catholic teacher and I differ on doctrines of Mary, and we do,
Yep.
then we will tell the other one they're wrong, And then I just finished a book on a couple of flights to some teacher recruitment fairs out of state. The book was titled something like, I'm really going to butcher the title, but this is the aim of it. It was really good comebacks for Protestant attacks on your Catholic faith, right? So this was a Catholic teacher gives me the book from Catholic Answers Press or something like that, so that I could deal with my own objections to the Catholic position on several issues. I read the whole book. I'll get back with her and I'll say, here's what challenged me. Here's what I don't have an answer to. Here's what I found beautiful about it.
Do you tell each other that you're deeply offending each other and that your words are violent?
It just doesn't exist. Nope. We walk away from each other wanting to read more and understand one another. Now, on the one hand, some of our Catholic families have said, well, Fisher's going to become Catholic. He's on his way. He's going to be Catholic. I'm not worried about that because what I'm concerned about, and this should be, right? Ideally, in the classical school, we say the truth has nothing to be afraid of. What you should be afraid of is being afraid of finding the truth.
I mean, there's convergence. 500 years. If the end result of the Reformation is a kind of consensus convergence, I'm not saying it's happening necessarily, but it's not about the brand. It's not about the label of the team.
Yeah. No, and it's not about winning.
Scholarly traditions.
And I think that's what's conservative is, okay, this is not about winning something. This is about finding the truth together. And the conservative part means words mean something. So let's say we're studying any text, whether it's Shakespeare or whether it's scripture or whether it's, Machen's Christianity and Liberalism. That's a really good read on preserving historic Christianity against liberalism in the Christian tradition. Whatever you're reading, the question that teachers ask in a classroom in a progressive school, which would be most schools typically, is, well, what does that mean to you?
Yes.
How do you understand that?
Yep.
And it doesn't really matter what answer the student gives.
Your truth.
The teacher will affirm the student for having an opinion.
Yep. How could I possibly counter your truth because you're 7?
So that's not conservative. So what we mean by conservative is not Republican or Democrat. I think you could have a liberal solution, a big government type of solution to a human problem or societal problem, and you could still be conservative in the way that I'm using the word, which is you're willing to conserve original meaning and intent of authors and respect them in their own context. Take from them, because you respect them and you give them dignity, what did they want me to hear here? I need to understand where they were coming from. And then if there's a way to transfer their message to my context today, I'll try to do so with fidelity, not because I want to look through my own lenses and determine what it means to me, but because I want to understand the author and their time and their perspective, their claims. And that's the way I would approach a family that comes to me that's of a different faith than I am or any other faculty member. It would be, I want to understand you. I respect you. And I'm not here to proselytize or win you over. We believe that's the family's job. But every school will teach from a worldview. Every school has some kind of dogma, whether they print it or not.
Yep.
And so Capstone has one. It's a biblical, historic, Christian one. But the way that we receive those who might not come from that worldview should be with great respect and openness.
So for the record then, if parents come to you and they're agnostic, but they see what's happening in the public school and they recognize the value of the classical education, and if they're not troubled by the fact that the stand that you take, so to speak, is not covert,
Right.
the framing,
Yeah.
the sort of the tree, the trunk amongst the branches is visible and self-evident and talked about.
Yep.
And they're not troubled by that, and they see how that is necessary. Even if they maybe haven't come all the way from a belief standpoint themselves, and assuming they recognize that their children would be potentially going to a school where many of their peers are going to might be there.
Yeah.
And if the parents are okay with that, and you feel like, they're not just running from the public school because they got into some issues or whatever, that they see the value of this approach. Right. Those are students that you'll take and parents that you'll view as valuable.
One of the things they do is we have this thing we call the family or Capstone Community Covenant. And a covenant is more than just a contractual arrangement. There's something more solemn and sacred about having a covenant with someone. And we recognize that, like, mom and dad remain the primary educators of their children. Capstone never becomes the primary educator of a child that comes to us. It's always mom and dad. That's why it's important for mom and dad to read that covenant and hear, like, full disclosure here. Here's what Capstone does. And what you agree to do as a parent is to play nicely within that framework. So you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to sign a faith statement of some kind saying you believe what we believe. But you do have to agree that you're not going to be adversarial about the things we disclosed up front. Now if we don't do something well, and this has happened, where we're using something in either our recitation, we have a period every day that's recitation. We recite good verse. We recite great speeches. We recite scripture. We recite facts from history and science, sometimes in verse themselves. It's only like 8 to 10 minutes a day, but students learn a lot through it, and they put rich things in their heart and mind. So classical schools often have that period. Once in a while, as we're curating what goes into recitation, we might choose something that rubs a particular denomination the wrong way, right? When that happens, sometimes it's just ignorance. Boy, it's hard to know all of the variety that's out there, and that we just stepped in something that directly contradicts where you're coming from. And a parent might say, hey, you said you weren't going to teach a particular denomination. And in which case I would say, ooh, wow, I thought that was kind of a universally Christian thing. We made a mistake, But the idea is that humility is probably our most core of all core values. And I'll look and say, I'm really sorry about that. Maybe we should start publishing that in advance so you can review it. So now we do that. That's on the website, because this commitment to be conservative, but also broadly ecumenical, it's a matter of trust for our families. If they're deeply convicted about their own personal beliefs and they come in and then we kind of surprise them with something that we didn't disclose up front, that's a sin on the school's part, but our goal is that when we do that, we'll just own it. I can own it with the student. I can own it with the parent, clean it up as best we can. You can't endeavor to have a school like ours without having some messes. You're going to step on toes. But the alternative is believe nothing, and just have this super vanilla education that's not rich. It doesn't challenge anybody. It's not creating this thesis antithesis kind of growth towards some arrival at something that's better because we had this pressure, right? The necessity of dialogue. So the second phase of classical ed, you have the grammar stage first, and then you have this logic or dialectic stage. And it's called dialectic because you're having this debate, this dialogue back and forth to learn and understand. And if you read Socratic conversations that Plato records, you can see the way that Socrates, he believed that he was drawing out of people knowledge that was already in them, that you never taught a student something didactically, that they had it within them and you drew it out. I'm not sure that I agree with that premise, but the method's really helpful because students are really engaged when you ask them questions about their own beliefs and their own thoughts. And as you do that, ultimately you end up owning whatever it was you discovered as a student because you were thinking through the process, not being lectured at the whole time. That dialectic or dialogical part of the school is important to us because if you don't have some kind of consternation as a student where you're confused or you're conflicted about what you thought you believed, but now you've been introduced to something else, you're not being educated. Right. And so when you hit junior high in the classical school, you're always having critical thinking in debate, and you're learning to listen patiently to a counter argument and then to evaluate, and at times to reassess and draw a different conclusion. And so if you don't have this messiness of different worldviews within the school, or at least different denominations, then you can't get the full impact of having that dialectic phase.
Right. You also have so anytime you're playing with what seem to be contradictions and you're trying to resolve them, or you're working in some sort of trade space where it's just not clear there's a way to look at this or a way to solve this problem or a way to describe this that doesn't have exceptions that don't fit it, or
Right.
or doesn't seem completely counter to this other thing that I also thought was true.
Right.
The process of trying to reconcile that, cognitive dissonance would be might be a term that
That's the word
psychology would use.
Yeah.
We underappreciate that processing through cognitive dissonance is effortful, and we feel it. We feel it with the cognitive difficulty. It's not cognitively easy, and we get cues. We get bodily cues with that. Hey, that's effortful, and we're literally consuming calories, because I said this in the last interview we did for the podcast. I'll say it again because it's really important stuff. Human brain resting metabolism uses about 25% of our calories. A chimp, it's like 8%. But when two chess masters are playing, there can be sweating.
Yep.
I mean, you can use a lot of energy with your brain. But anytime you're using resources, we have these conserved systems in our bodies that let us know.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you're using up a lot of calories. Are you sure? Because at least the lineage that we remember has been scarcity, and this high fructose corn syrup surplus world. That's not what our cells remember. That's not what our DNA remembers. So are you sure? And so we have all this effort, and there's a tendency to want to avoid the effort because you don't realize that all you're listening to is a shallow metabolical warning of you're using resources. Right. But that's what it's pushing through the effort to try to resolve what might be contradictions that drives the neuroplasticity to generate new connections in your brain. That takes resources to literally generate and forge those connections, send oxygen to those areas so that you can build the protein, so you can, expand the dendrites, make the bonds, all that stuff. You're building stuff. And the cognitive difficulty is just the alarm. Are you sure you want to use this? And the more you take young minds continuously through that and actually tell them that that's a good thing, that's what we're supposed to do. Yes, contradictions are okay. We're going to work through them, frame it in a way that balances them, or just recognize that at some point it's very difficult to resolve, and people have been arguing about this particular issue for hundreds of years or whatever, trying to reconcile it. Don't shy away from it. Don't smear it over with sort of some sort of cartoon sort of view, whether that would be sort of a fundamentalist view or Church of Woke view or whatever, that different framing. But I mean, the simplistic thing that yes, this answers everything. Don't question anything. The more you deal with questioning, the more you deal with doubt, and the only people that seem to be the most certain in life are atheists. Yep. I've got it all figured out. It's nothing.
Well, that's that's the number one concern, I think, or accusation of a Christian school. But maybe for us, when we opened a classical Christian school, and maybe part of it's the Hillsdale affiliation, right? Yep. So we're a Hillsdale College member school. So what people do is they try to connect the dots and say, oh, okay, so Hillsdale College, what are they about? I see on their social media presence or in their newsletters, I see these conservative points of view, politically in the DC sense, politically conservative points of view. And so, wait, let's connect the dots. Who do they have speak at their college? This guy called January 6th a hoax. I bet Capstone, because they're a Hillsdale member school, teaches their kindergartners that January 6th was a hoax. Actually had a local reporter ask me that question. Accuse me, really. He didn't really ask the question. He just said, you must be teaching this. Deny it.
Yeah, just half the day. We just spend half the day talking about
with kindergartners.
Yep.
But the concern there is that, okay, you're an indoctrination school. Mm-hmm. The first editorial piece that came out about us said new Trumpy school for Fargo ? Last line was something about grab your red hats for the uniform, which is absurd. I mean, I don't know who will listen to this and hear the awful truth that I didn't actually vote for Trump, at least the first time around. because I was like, well, I'm going to vote for another conservative candidate that I actually believe in, despite the fact that I'm probably throwing away my vote. Well, no doubt I was, but I couldn't bring myself to vote otherwise. So it's funny for me when we're trying to create a great deal of introspection and circumspection and thoughtfulness in our students, instead of painting with a broad brush, right, instead of stereotyping, and so when the accusations come that we're actually the opposite of that, we're just indoctrinating and we're being fundamentalists, whether it's politically or religiously, it's people who haven't sat down to actually look at our curriculum or ask us questions, or quite frankly, with regard to Hillsdale College, they've probably never sat in on any classes there or met with students in the cafeteria, as I did last week, and discovered that these are very thoughtful people who are comfortable with the cognitive dissonance and embrace it because they think there's value in going through that. That's the goal of the classical school. And quite frankly, I mean, I believe that renewal movement is a great hope for our country, and for civilization, as it were, because it's willing to sit down and have civil discourse. We can have a free and disciplined exchange of ideas, which is our community covenant says that we're committed to a free and disciplined exchange of ideas. And so that for us to violate that, which, by the way, I think in Scripture, the Apostle Paul models that well. He's in Athens and in the book of Acts, and he's speaking with pagans there about the Christian faith in their own terms and very respectfully about their artwork and their idols that they'd built. And so he meets the culture where it is. Clearly, the guy was pretty convinced that he'd found something profound that they needed to know. So he's sharing it with them diplomatically. They weren't always diplomatic. Depends on the audience and what's going on. But we really would bristle at the typical characterization of our school as not being a place of open dialogue and consideration of ideas, because we value the great conversation of the ages, and it's always been that. But there is a sense in which, because we are a Christian school, those of us who lead the school certainly have very deeply drawn conclusions and held convictions about what is objectively true about our world. You use in your language a kind of evolutionary language of how certain human attributes exist, and I might look at it and say, well, there's a design component here that may or may not be, or probably isn't due to random mutation, right, yep, and natural selection, but rather an engineering of a God who thought about providing for this creature that's the apex of creation, made in his image, with these astounding capabilities at the molecular level. And so part of what we're doing in a classical Christian school is studying content, say the music and math, the math and music, the way that the human physiology is affected by the way a chord hits, right? And why is it that from a physics standpoint and a molecular standpoint makes you feel a certain thing? What's the connection between these disciplines that you're studying? All of that is meant to invoke awe and wonder. Wonder is missing from education largely
Absolutely.
today. And the classical school, often you'll hear teachers, they get tired of the word. It sounds like jargon, or just a cliche, but we talk about wonder. But every lesson plan, the question I'm going to ask the teacher is, well, where are you inducing wonder here? How are we fostering wonder? Because if there's not wonder, who wants to be in that classroom? Who wants to be in that school? Who wants to be around people who don't wonder? And so you can't wonder if you're being indoctrinated or you're just receiving dogma only, right? There's no wonder in that. And it does feel like a little bit of oppression. It feels coercive. There's reasons we have like sometimes visceral reactions to walking into a school. A lot of us didn't have a real pleasant experience with that. And the idea at Capstone, whether it's the architecture that's so beautiful and inspiring, or the busts of 12 great figures from history that they walk in and are greeted by in Founders Hall in the front doors, all of it is intended to inspire and induce wonder.
I think that is something I'd just like to talk about just a little bit. And for those, if there's people listening here that are now listening because they think this is some sort of conservative talking point thing, or they view this as like just two conservative white dudes, sharing their construals, and they're really, they're so uneducated about either the real complexity or the real structures of the world, whatever. The term conservative also to me, and again, I don't mean that in in the political branding sense. It's what do you do when things don't make sense, and where do you, while you're trying to work it out, what do you weight more? A whole cloth explanatory framework that you made up, a progressive postmodern. Oh, it's just okay. If you want to lean into Marx, and you've discovered communism again, and you just like the millionth person before you, just believe it hasn't been properly implemented, and you're such a good person, you and your buddies would implement it right, and not bring mass murder to the world. If you have that, you have that ideological framing that gives you certainty. That's its own soma. That's its own opioid. That's its own drug. And certainty is a thing we search for because it tells us we're in an environment where our predictions come true. Life is good. Don't worry about having to spend any more resources on your brain. That's why it feels good. That's why certainty feels good. But I think what I'd like to emphasize, and sort of reframe what you just said, the world that you're bringing up the students in, the framing that you're bringing up the students at Capstone in, is more of an embracing of the ongoing dialogue and the ongoing recognition that the more you really study something, you're not necessarily going to just live in a world of everything. I know everything, and there's no more mystery whatsoever. If you don't have any mystery, if you think you get everything, you do have a sense of, oh, good, I've got it all figured out, but you don't have wonder and awe. How could you, if you've got it all figured out? Yeah. It doesn't exist. Awe is as a experience, the experience of awe, the experience of wonder, as a positive experience anyway, is actually seeing something that you don't have a immediate explanatory framework for, but yet you have an implicit right. You recognize it implicitly. You know it in a sense, but you can't break it into pieces. You're in the presence of something transcendent, and it's a good. Mm-hmm. And if you think you've got the world figured out, and that's all you see, and you make sure that you only attend to those things that fit that framing, and as soon as you get something that doesn't fit the framing, instead of questioning your framing, you figure out a way to either learn to ignore it or to label it something. All of your sense of awe and wonder is gone.
Yeah, but what's ironic about that, you would think that the Christian would always have awe and wonder because there's this
cartoon view of a Christian,
this God,
yeah.
Right? That should always be inspiring awe and wonder. But in fact, what happens in some Christian circles is that we think we got it all figured out down into some kind of formula mm-hmm. that removes all mystery. And at the end of the day, I would postulate, and I would say I've probably seen that those who get to that place end up worse than those who never knew God at all, because they've made a mockery of Him, and it's a dangerous place to be. And
you can justify almost anything,
but that's
for your
true.
Ideology.
So it doesn't matter what the worldview is when you decide you've got it all figured out, and you start moving forward with that kind of ego. It's dangerous for the people who are in your orbit.
You will do, if that's what you cast your lot with, this cartoon explanatory framework, and it will be a cartoon because it has to be. If you have to be able to explain it, then it's limited to our ability to explicitly create things in our limited minds. It's a left hemisphere expression with words. If that's your world, and you've got it figured out, and you run into somebody, who doesn't agree with that, or you run into some experience that doesn't fit that, you're faced with kind of a choice. Am I completely wrong? Which is to say, am I actually lost? Yeah. do I not know who I am? Do I not know where I'm at? Do I not know where I'm going or where I've come from? Do I not know what I should do? Because all of that will be dissolved if your explicit framework goes. Or do I make sure that this other person that's threatening me, it's now a threat response,
Right.
Shuts the hell up,
Right.
or this thing that I've experienced that's contradictory. How do I construe something, or otherwise learn to just ignore it, and whether that's me as an individual or as a group.
Right.
And you see that in media right now with stories that don't track, that don't fit the narrative, that don't fit the worldview of the literally the reporters and the editors. So, that's not a story. We just won't cover that. It's the same phenomenon of protecting your narrative. And if you don't accept, if you refuse to accept that there's things that you're not going to be able to explain with words, but yet they're still there, that they're still real.
Well, and there's what we want for our students. I would be deceptive if I didn't say, well, I want all of our students. So while we're not actively trying to convert a student against their parents' will, right? That's not the kind of thing that's happening. I'm not trying to win every student over to my worldview, except we've designed the entire school experience to help parents who share our view of the world to pass that on to their children. So there is a sense in which what we're doing every day is trying to help young people to embrace affectively, right, emotively, whatever spiritual means, viscerally, intellectually, cognitively. We want them to embrace Christ and his kingdom, and that takes explaining if somebody's not coming from a Christian worldview in terms of the word kingdom. But if somebody brings their child to the school or works in the school and doesn't want everyone there to have that, then they're in the wrong place. But a parent may say, I know you are doing that. I think my child can withstand it, and I'm not afraid of you doing it. That would be an accurate way of expressing it. But what I want for those children who do develop that faith and that conviction is that they would hold it much like you've described, with enough sophistication, and by that I just mean that they're willing to acknowledge there's mystery and I don't understand everything, despite being convinced of who Jesus is and building my life upon him. I'm willing to walk into contradictory texts and conversations without fear, and I'm willing to ask questions and listen and try to know and understand. Maybe it sounds contradictory to say that we have a Christian classical school where we want children deeply convicted about who Christ is and living as disciples of him as a primary focus of our mission, while at the same time being open to exposing them to all of the accusations and arguments that might undermine their confidence in that very thing that we're trying to pass on to them. But that is in fact what we're doing. So the fact that I would have students read junior year, The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, is because, unless a better one comes along that I think does it well, I want them to hear The New Angry Atheist before they get into their classroom in college, because I think they should wrestle with his accusations. They should wrestle with his logic or lack thereof at times. And we want them, I'd rather bring the Muslim cleric in to speak to my students so they can ask him questions and they can see his charm and see, like, he's a really nice guy, I like him, than have us just tell them about what Islam is from some Christian book. Right. And so there is this, some parents will struggle with that. Like, I don't understand that. How do you do both of those things? Well, at the end of the day, it's because we actually believe Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And that if you'll pursue him, you don't need to fear exploring and understanding these other ideas. And but I would also say to those who don't follow Christ within the school, this would be students because teachers are Christ followers. But I would say, hey, listen, if you have an opposing view that could show me I'm wrong about Jesus, I would be happy to read your book or hear it or whatever it is, because I would want to discover I'm wrong about him. And so
does that mean that if you have a student, let's say you're K through 12, which you will be as you grow and you get your facilities, and as presumably, I presume you're going to try to grow with your cohort.
Yep.
So that whole 13, 14, 15-year-old, that's oftentimes a form of time of exploration, a time of people trying to define themselves sometimes sort of schismogenically, which is to say
Sure.
how they're different from
Yep.
maybe their parents or maybe something else. You're inevitably going to get the punk rockers within your school, and you're going to get some student who was raised in this, who's then going to be, you know what, I think I'm an atheist.
Sure.
I would, based on what I'm hearing, I would wager that student, or if it was just, I read The God Delusion by Dawkins, and I actually think that there's some stuff here, and I'm not so sure anymore.
Yeah.
I would think that person would be a source of curiosity and engagement for the rest of the students if that person had the right attitude, as opposed to a witch burn, kind of. And I'm not suggesting that you guys are going to accidentally bud a bunch of atheists, but I mean, shit happens.
It happens. It's going to happen. Yeah. It's not a real school if it doesn't happen.
Yeah. So
yeah, I've got plenty of stories.
You're not going to ostracize that person or say or call. No, we have to call your parents in.
This works two
Billy
ways.
Said this, and he's out now.
Pull something from the side that's a little bit different. I was at Harding Academy in Memphis as the academic dean for 4 years, and we had a large what I would call an LGBTQ population, right? So we had a number of students who were, it started in a club they wanted to have a club as a diversity club. Well, we were in Memphis, long time civil rights history. It's an essential city in the story of American civil rights movement. And so you would think diversity club would be about color of skin, ethnicity. Well, it ended up being about, sexual expression. And so I started having lunch. This was a Christian school. I would call it a conservative Christian school. But started having lunch with students who identified that way once a week, because I wanted to understand what's it like to be you. You're out identifying this way, and in this context, that's a Southern kind of Bible Belt traditional place. How's life every day? What's the bus like? What's let's get to know each other. They knew that I.
You mean you didn't say you're going to burn in hell forever, so I don't want to talk to you?
Didn't say it. I did tell them, what you're doing is, what the school's position is on this, right? But
you treated them like
you can't
a
be making
being,
out with your same-sex partner at school. Like, that's not going to work. But neither can the heterosexual kids do that. But the idea was, let me meet you where you are today. I'm not going to solve this today. Like, do I want you to live that lifestyle? No, I don't think God intended that for you. And the school's pretty clear on that. But in the meantime, welcome to my table. You're just a kid, whatever your belief system is, whatever you're going through, your parents have to decide how to handle that, And so I always made sure parents knew, your child identifies this way, just to make sure that because I don't know how you want to parent that. But at school, we don't have a policy, and this is true at Capstone too, of trying to control what a student's ideology is at a particular point of development. They are kids. They're half-baked.
So can we talk about that? So, I brought up the atheist thing, and it's fun with it. But now you've got the 15-year-old who's, maybe they started pre-K at Capstone, and they come out as gay. I'm gay, I'm a lesbian. The narrative on the left would be you're teaching an oppressive doctrine, that person who's born that way can't help it. You're going to destroy that person's sense of self. You'll break their self narrative. Will not be coherent because they won't be able to reconcile the dogma that you're promulgating with the reality of their feelings, and that they're likely to kill themselves or spiral into addiction, despair, that sort of thing. Because there's strong correlation between I don't know all the numbers for every and I'm trying to be respectful to everything of the alphabet of LGBTQIA plus 2S. My understanding is on the T, the trans, and a suicide rate is a thing that gets brought up a lot. My sense is if somebody's a 15-year-old at Capstone and was sort of brought up in that environment and is now wrestling with that, and maybe has come to the conclusion that they're gay. And I know some people won't believe this or not, but my sense from hearing you and getting to know you, this isn't the first time we've had a conversation, is regardless of where that teenager ends up in life, the probability of them having resilience, the probability of them being armed intellectually and having developed the literal neuronal connections to deal with trying to reconcile, two things that don't seem to come together, in order to navigate that to some future state, even if that future state might be, contrary to what might be what the school would say, or you might say, or a teacher might say, the scripture says.
Right.
But it seems to me that the capstone and the classical education environment is a much better way to scaffold processing those things, whether it's who you're sexually attracted to, or enter 500 other things that seem to run that seem to generate incoherence. You're teaching children. This isn't a indoctrination place. These are the talking points. Recite these. You didn't recite that one correctly.
Right.
Don't think for yourself. This is many ways the opposite of that. That I would wager, like I said, literally wager, that a student wrestling with sexual orientation in that environment might actually have better outcomes, regardless of where. I would think so.
Yeah. The key, Christian fundamentalism has made some serious.
I know I just pissed a lot of people off
mistakes
by stating that
over the years in terms of how you handle adolescents dealing with same-sex attraction, or
for sure,
whatever their issue is in terms of their body image, and because we've oversimplified the complexity of it. And that's troubling. It's been, I think, good intentions. I think people have feared for the children. They love them. But it hasn't always been artfully done. And what we would say is ultimately, look, that's the parent's job. That's the church's job. That's their healthcare provider's job. If the parent is working with them as their advisors, whoever it is they look to, they're going to work through that together. What we say to parents in our covenant that they sign when they come in is Capstone is a place for an academic education. We are cultivating affections and intellect, right? It's a culture making that's happening too. But in that process, we don't want to bring romance and personal sexuality into the classroom or the hallways. So that means we're not really encouraging boyfriend-girlfriend relationships. We're here for scholarship and other activities. What's going on outside of school will affect what happens in school. That's human. We're not saying like, don't talk, don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. But we do want parents to embrace early while their children are young. You know what? Maybe my child doesn't need to be thinking they're defined by their sexuality as like the primary thing. And right now, I mentioned Truman's book earlier. I was at the Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And so what he mentions, like after the plastic self, where we just kind of make myself whatever I'm going to be, I'm just moldable material. But the one after that is kind of like the sexual self and the political sexual self. And that's kind of where we are today. So if a child comes into our school and because they've been immersed in this culture, they begin to view themselves and their worth as being tied to acceptance of their sexual proclivities, or the way that they see their bodies and define themselves. And that has to be affirmed and accepted by those around them for their very dignity to be affirmed. They've lost something, we believe, about true anthropology, what makes a human valuable and have dignity and worth. And what we want is that yes, that's one aspect of your identity. That's one aspect of your lived experience.
It's that your worth is not defined by something solo dimensional. By something, your worth as a human being, or your purpose as a human being, is what happens as you live through your life interacting with other human beings. How have you enriched? How are you enriching the world? How are you making this world simplistically a better place for children? All of the, and that's relational. That's in what acts you do. That's what do you do? What do you do? Whether that's an action that's interpersonal or something you do that might be constructive or generative. There's has nothing to do with like what color hair you have or
like the things that they hang their identity on. They're just looking for affirmation. I mean, adolescents oftentimes, right, are looking for it in the wrong places, but they'll get it from anywhere. So will adults.
But to some extent, the explosion of these things, these explosions of identity, I mean, they didn't come out of the. They feel like it's I've got to have a thing that defines me,
right?
Because I don't have anything that defines me.
I got to fit into one of these groups to know where I belong, and
because I have no sense of belonging. I don't know what my purpose is.
Well, the family is the unit that creates that, right? First and foremost, and a healthy family dynamic is obviously going to be a tremendous strength to a child in terms of understanding their worth and their dignity. Unfortunately, I think the current dismantling of viewing, all this talk of patriarchy and the oppressive nature of marriage and so forth denies the essential value historically, and we would say, theologically, at the deepest levels of what a human relationship between a man and woman is for and what it does for children. We all, as husbands and wives, fathers and mothers, introduce dysfunction into our children's lives that can create problems with the way that they embrace or don't embrace their sexuality. And kids come into a school with every assortment of experiences, nurture, and nature that create who they are when they come in. The goal for us is, can we accept them with great dignity and honor, regardless of what they perceive about themselves or feel about themselves at any one chapter along the way? The key for families to understand going to a school like Capstone is you're not going to come here and thrive if you're promoting anything that is detracting from what we've said our stated goal is as a school together and as a school community. So, I mean, that's why things like even a prom, like we don't design prom the way that other schools do. We have something called protocol. And we
don't have a twerking competition?
No, we don't. We do formally teach ballroom dancing. I say we do it. It's coming, right? Okay. And we do teach etiquette. We talk about, but when you take your date to that, it can't be a romantic date. This is a curricular exercise. So you get to go with your buddy's girlfriend because he's not allowed to go with her.
Oh, wow.
Because this is not a romantic event. Now, when you get there, guess what? You're having a great time because you're not all hung up on the silliness that happens with the hormones and the games of dating and what's going to happen tonight. And, instead we get to have a good time together, right? With good music and dancing and fun. And we have adult conversation around a table and faculty attend with you. And there's some parents who get to attend every year and it's embraced, right? And so there's all this feasting and celebrating at the school. There's so much about the human experience that is ignored in other schools that we're cultivating that I think when you come in and you say, no, it's got to be about me and my exclusive relationship with my man or with my girl, or and we're going to have all these ugly social games between mean girls and mean guys. And that's when, even in a Christian setting, someone who's different than the norm is going to find it really hard because the school hasn't found anything bigger than that stuff to focus itself upon. I think ideally you should be able to attend Capstone regardless of where your own sexuality is from an identity standpoint. You should be able to attend and find so much meaning in your community and worth in the way that you interact in your community, whether it's through the activities you engage in or the way that the community lifts you up and values you in your role in the school, that other issue you're dealing with, whether it's a heterosexual situation, homosexual, trans, whatever it is, that doesn't have to define you at the school. At the same time, we won't have pride celebrations at the school, and we won't be talking about social justice issues the same way. So some of those issues, those ideological issues that are front and center in the public school will not be for us because we don't believe they're fruitful toward a classical liberal arts education.
And to me, those are many of those conversations are ideological in a way that they're religiously framed in sort of a religious substitute.
Sure.
And so the idea that oh my God, you don't let that in your school. Well, that's intolerant. Well, it's in our schools, the public schools now, and those are actually religious narratives, sort of, in the sense that they have sort of fundamental axiomatic value statements behind them.
Yeah.
And then they put those values on a hierarchy to say this is more important than these other things, and then there's norms associated with that. If you go against this particular value framework, you are a bad person. Now, how can you frame you are a bad person, without having a moral framework behind it? I would like to explore one aspect of this, and again, coming back to the gay student, the hypothetical gay student that came out. I hear everything that's said about the environment and what you're at least explicitly trying to create. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, and I guess projecting the future a little bit, when you're fully K through 12 and your new building is, you got your 540 students. Kids can be assholes, and we all norm enforce, and sort of the younger we are, the more cartoony those norm enforcements and the less subtlety, and really little kids, like little 3-year-olds, can be quite violent little buggers sometimes, and. Everybody, that's an adult here went through a high school system, and my framing of like what a junior high is for people that didn't fit expected norms, is that brutal little bastards being bullies. Yep. How if somebody is. Whether it's they're 15 and they came out as gay, or they just, I don't know if I believe anymore, or I'm one of the two, my parents are Hindu. I am not, and that's what I'm taught at home, or that's how I feel, whatever. I'm believing things or having a hard time believing certain things. I'm norm violating at some level. You might have explicitly created within the school environment the expectations that you'll be accepting and loving and tolerant, and have a framing and a Christian framing at that, of everybody has the spark of divinity within them, and everybody is of equal worth before God, and all of that, and that would serve as a counterpoint. But still, you have kids being kids. How do you? What's your attitude there? And using our hypothetical of a gay student, but this applies broadly. Like, how do you keep? To what extent? And because I would also say, and I realize I'm ranting here, norm enforcement serves a really good purpose. We don't. Yep. We have, as a society, we've forgotten how to enforce norms right now, and it's hell on. It's literally, we're bringing hell on earth. It seems to me. Sure. So you want your children, your cohort of kids within a school, to productively and positively be both modeling the right behavior and enforcing norms in a way that itself doesn't create its own problems. How do you deal with something like a gay student, or what's your plan? Because your kids are pretty young now.
Well, there's a difference between a student who is attracted to the same sex and being in school and dealing with that. So if the question is, how do you deal with a same-sex attracted student?
How do you deal with the student
who's not embraced a gay identity and lifestyle? Because those would be two different situations, I think. So I think if we're talking about the student who says, I'm out as gay, and I plan to find a man, if it's a young man someday, who I'm going to marry.
Whatever.
Well, you're in a school that's going to teach that marriage is between a man and a woman, that it's God ordained, and even if, probably as conservative, even if we weren't talking about it being God ordained, we'd say it's biologically advantageous, or there would be. So you've got that didactic side, but if the question is, how do you practically deal with the social realities?
How do you deal with the rest of the cohort that?
Like how are we going to coach them in responding in that situation?
How do you keep a toxic bullying environment from manifesting itself?
Well, it's just not permitted, period. But it's important to designate that at a certain point, children are not even ready to identify as something like that. And when they do, it's premature, and certainly should not be encouraged by the parents, right? They should be having those conversations elsewhere, and should be instructing their child that's not the kind of thing you share openly at school, because you're still working through this and it's private. It's not because, hopefully the parents are saying, it's not because I'm ashamed of you. It's because you're young and you're working through this and this is personal, there is something as a norm that has to do with like what's appropriate to share publicly and what you deal with privately. There's nothing wrong with that. Whereas the culture is saying you have to be out and be proud and receive affirmation. That's dangerous, obviously, for a child who's still in development, regardless of what the issue is, but particularly in these sensitive issues. When I was in Memphis, we had boys who would use derogatory terms toward boys who were gay.
Right.
Right. Well, that's a level 3 disciplinary issue in that discipline policy.
Okay.
You're going to end up suspended or expelled
Good.
for using hateful language toward them. One of the things that we say is you devalue that person, you objectify them, and you use them for your entertainment. That's sinful. You know, as a Christian school, we're going to use the word sin, we're going to use the word repentance to deal with things that we believe are objective realities about human moral conduct. And one of those is that you don't meet, so to speak, we're all sinners, so you don't meet your fellow sinners with condescension and derision and judgment. We can have conversations, moral conversations and debates about how one ought to live, and that's fine. That's not bullying when it's in the context of an appropriate, facilitated conversation. But you can't have, particularly in the high school, because you're really not going to be discussing those at a younger age. Those are off limits. But when you are discussing them eventually, as a responsible school is going to end up doing, you're going to have those boundaries set. And even say to the kids, look, this isn't a conversation that you should engage in with a student who identifies as gay, 3 of you discussing with that student that issue at the lunch table, right? That's a power dynamic that's going to be very unsettling for that individual. Very few adolescent personalities are going to walk away from that feeling too good. And it's why we talk to parents about please coach your children on not making this their centerpiece at school.
Right.
But at the same time, the bullying aspect of it, no Christ follower, which is what we're trying to train up within the school among the families of faith who are embracing it, it should be essentially important. No Christ follower is going to, make derogatory remarks about another human being. And so that's our concern first and foremost. Is one of the things in our covenant is the dignity of all people. And so we have a paragraph in there that actually gets at how you treat people who come at life differently. I believe we might even identify sexual identity in there. And so there is this up front when you come in, this understanding that just because you're in the majority and we have a particular norm here that we do enforce, doesn't mean that you get the opportunity then to act better than or to speak in a harmful or hurtful way to someone who doesn't abide by that.
I think that this, certainly in my lifetime, looking socially, the issue of sexual orientation, the things like trans and the ramification of identity. There's a third element going on culturally, but the issue of human sexuality seems like it was like the effective cudgel because of the way that decades ago would have been maybe a little bit more typical of a Christian, what you'd expect of a typical Christian school, whatever that means, if that's even a term that's a useful term, that would expect that if a kid, you wouldn't even have a kid that came out as gay. You'd have a kid that like people suspect might be, and then there would be norm and bullying around it, and whether that was in a public school or a Christian school, as within our culture, we've wrestled with that, and that was a thing that certainly we wrestled with that during my lifetime. The Christian framing lagged the secular framing about learning how to not be overtly othering and cruel. Right. And I think that's still used as a cudgel, and I think and I didn't want to make the whole conversation about this, but sure. I'm trying to open minds of some people that might be listening that just view this for but and
well, I think it's going to be tough though, because at the end of the day, what our friends who see the issue differently than us would be concerned about is that we're not wholly affirming the personhood,
right,
and of that adolescent, and it grieves me, quite frankly. I mean, really, it grieves me to think that that's the way that it would be received, as rejecting their personhood. If I reject an expression or a behavior, really, if I reject a certain lifestyle that might grow out of their perceived identity or desire, and I don't think as a Christian, when we look at all of the virtue and vice that we're seeking to also educate our children in, and cultivating virtue and helping them to recognize vice for what it is, we're talking about things like courage and fortitude and charity. And these are the virtues that we don't have a virtue we don't have chastity in there, but that would have to do with prudence and reverence. And, but there is a sense in which I think people could get this idea that the thing that we're hung up on as Christians is sex. Like we get this. And if we're hung up on sex, we must all be sexual perverts, or else we wouldn't care about it so much. But the idea is that it's a very potent part of our personhood. It's physiologically, psychologically, emotionally, I would say even to the soul level. Sexuality is powerful in a way that other aspects of human biology and psychology are not. I mean, it's just, and it carries with it consequences. And so when you believe, going back to Aristotle, when you believe that there is this kind of final purpose, and there is an efficient purpose in God, in our case, who created sexuality for a particular end, and for us, we would say it's a holy end, then it's a very important thing for us to talk about in our school. And what grieves me is that people would think that the context or the motive in talking about it has something to do with power and not with wanting to bless students with the best human sexuality experience possible and use it the way it was intended to be utilized. I don't want to use the word use, that's very utilitarian, but experience and express it, practice it in such a way that it is for blessing and not for harm. And the biblical teaching on that, the traditional teaching of the church is that it is not for ultimate human flourishing and blessing to be outside of the bonds of marriage, to be sexually engaged outside of a male-female marriage. And so a school like ours is going to have to teach that. It's part of the transcendent, right? What I don't have an answer to is, and we'll be dealing with it. I mean, for all I know, we're dealing with it right now quietly. Right, we've got 7th graders, we've got 8th graders next year. So these things are rumbling, and they're going to start to surface. Indeed, I mean this very literally, my prayer is that we'll be able to navigate that by God's grace in such a way that those young people feel fully embraced and loved, but recognize that there's a part of themselves that is at odds with what's being taught and believed by my teachers or by a lot of my peers, maybe even by my church or my parents, and we'll be able to wrestle with that safely. And it doesn't always work out that way. And so, but there's no way that a school can give up from our vantage point. A school that has our mission can give up on that particular norm, if you will,
right,
or purpose, God-given purpose, if you will, for human sexuality and remain true to its mission. Like there's an integrity problem there. And yet, we would want to embrace the best of what society has learned in terms of how to not address that issue in a way that's harmful to the individual.
So what I was hoping to expose in sort of dwelling here a little bit was the non-coarse, the subtle and sophisticated, the embrace of the complexity of it, the recognizing that there is navigating this space, at least initially involves dissonance, cognitive dissonance, and that at the end you stay true to convictions. You recognize that you have to have a value framework to move forward. We have one at Capstone, but we also understand that the complexity of human interactions and all of the things going on with humans make it not clear all the time exactly what you're supposed to do in every circumstance. And when faced with that, we fall back upon sort of the what would be the proper virtuous way to navigate this. What's the What's the heart-centric,
Yeah.
empathy-forward, Christ as the model way to inform this trade space? If you will, I'm an engineer and I tend to think mechanistically. So if anyone that might have already discounted this school because of a particular progressive mapping that they have, and it's centered around yeah buts, what I hoped to, and I feel we did. This is something as whether it's an atheist at the school, somebody gay at the school, or somebody of a different religion at the school. It sure doesn't sound like that there's a hardcore indoctrination going on, or a fear of the other.
Right. No, and that would be a fear-driven kind of approach. Is antithetical to intellectual honesty generally, honesty in general. Right. Scripture says perfect love drives out fear. That there's no fear in perfect love, and so I think that's the vantage point with which we come to it. But it's fair for people to say, based on their experience, I think with Christians, devout Christians, that their experience has not been one of affirmation of dignity or unconditional love or any of those things. And at the same time, I fear that it's going to be hard for us to be received differently than that. And that's our hope, that's our mission, that's our aim. To be honest, we have this conversation with Christian families comparing us to other Christian schools. And though I think we're deeply orthodox historically, on these issues, there are those who want a more pristine student body where their children won't have to encounter such a thing.
Parents are concerned about and I tend to fall back on mechanistic and evolutionary framings for things. And when I say the term evolution, I don't find that doesn't to me mean Richard Dawkins' version. Yep. There's room in evolution as a process for a hand in the process. Yep. But I forgot where I was going here.
I had mentioned parents.
Yes.
Want this kind of
the peer groups of
insulated environment.
So you're as a parent and watching my children become adults, and people who study this, it sure looks like as a kid approaches adolescence, the peer group is far more influential on the framing you accept as true to the world, and even like the values that your values, your morality, your framing, how you see the world, who you are, what in group you're a part of. And the role you're supposed to play, finding a functional a practical functional niche within that group that people find purposeful. Your peer group, supersedes your parents' influence a whole hell of a lot as you go to adolescence, and the evolutionary argument is like a tumult within villages and people being forced to be nomadic, and if you end up having to find yourself in your family group in a new village that had sort of cultural shifts, you're much more likely to be accepted and find a role in society, find a mate, and reproduce your lineage if you learn to adapt to the norms of the new environment, or the new temporal environment as norms evolve. So teenagers are heavily influenced by other teenagers and learn to ignore their parents, or as my father would say, children grow up in spite of their parents, and children sharpen their teeth on their parents' bones. Yep. Anyway, long rant here, but it's normal for parents to see that and watch that happen with maybe an older kid, or watch that happen to friends' kids. I lost my child. I tried to raise them right, and then they got this friend group, and now they think I'm a bad person or whatever, and now they want to go be an artist somewhere. So I understand why there would be a desire on the part of some parents for the pure. We want only. How could you bring in students that don't have true believers as parents? And why aren't you kicking this kid out who's now doubting? But what I'm hearing is the classical education of this, and this sort of historic tradition of scholarly Christianity rooted in the classics is about a continuing examination and dealing with these challenging issues. It is about navigating through dissonance. It is about dealing with doubt and moving forward, putting your feet forward in the face of doubt,
right?
And not about the platitudes and the talk and the bullet points that cast away all doubt, so that you don't have to think about stuff. And so it would seem that if you guys are successful at the critical mass and then the inertia of that mass, to have that culture you're trying to cultivate, that would be a peer group that wouldn't steer your kid to some strange place where you don't even know them anymore, but would also inculcate, if that's the right word, in that child becoming an adult, a way of looking at the world, a way of processing contradictions in the world, a rooting in tradition, when in the face of I don't know what the hell to do, that would provide for them not only a North Star type guidance and some practice behaviors, but a resilience,
right,
for dealing with the world. And the world's, there's Capstone Academy, and it's this great place that the good things are happening, but then there's this giant cesspool of a world outside, and then there's media working its way in through all the devices and everything else. It seems like a parent that's afraid for their child and who their child might become outside of their influence. The classical model seems to me the most effective of all the options versus an isolation model.
Yeah, not to say that it's in the middle, right, between the others, but there's a sense in which what we're trying to do is it's not coercive indoctrination. Like, it's definitely not that. It's not a kind of permissive, free-for-all postmodern approach, which is what I would call the general progressive model now. It's not the insular, protect them from. It's more of equipping them to go out and, quite frankly, to be rooted while maintaining informed relevance, right? Christ would tell the story of the wise man who built his house on the rock, and we've made it a children's notion because of a song that they often sing in Sunday school. But this rock upon which you build your foundation for life withstands the storms, and the storms are going, whether it's ideas that bring about doubt and this cognitive dissonance, or suffering. For most of us, it's suffering that becomes the dark night of doubt. And so how do you prepare for that? Well, Jesus says you build your house on the rock, and the rock is obedience to his teachings, his commands even, if you will. And that obedience then, which at Capstone we would call that heart-shaping habits, or cultural liturgies. These are things that we ask students to do every day that build a foundation that's on rock, not sand, so that when the storm comes, it isn't swept away. But these are things like practicing the world as it ought to be virtuously. It has to do with how we treat one another. We have students who greet in the mornings. It's their job as they, in the upper school, they belong to a house. We have a house system like a British boarding school would have, even though we don't board. Think Harry Potter without the witchcraft.
Without the sorting.
Right, yeah.
Hat. But don't have a Slytherin in the dungeon?
So you have a house Nicaea and Alexandria, and who else do we have right now? So I don't remember the third one we have right now, but we'll have 7 eventually. But Athens, that's who we have right now. Athens, Nicaea, and Alexandria. But those houses rotate through. They've got greeting duty in the mornings. They're going to get there before the other students and then greet each student with dignity and warmth as they come into the school. When you walk in the hallway and there's only 2 of you in the hallway, greet one another by name. If it's groups of people, well, okay, maybe you don't have to greet everybody by name. But if it's 2 of you and you don't know the other person, reach out your hand, shake hand, introduce yourself, get to know them.
And these are in school uniforms, right?
Yes, in school uniforms, yeah. So you're basically, what we're saying to kids, and you're saying yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, to communicate that I've really heard you and I'm taking this seriously, There are things that we have them do that are building their house on a rock. And they seem simple, and maybe they seem old-fashioned, or like, well, what would that do? That seems pretty innocuous. They create a posture of reverencing the dignity of the other person. And as you do that, look people in the eye and so forth, be an active listener. We teach them how to listen well in a conversation. These are things that at the end of the day will serve them well for when they get into a pretty turbulent world in which they're really well rooted while people around them are kind of floating all over the place with the currents. They're also able to, they have their identity rooted in something bigger than whatever political social group people want to put you in, right? Whatever the identity politics of the day are. You belong to a kind of human identity that spans time and current cultural context. And it's why someone can reject me for what I believe or who I am, how I express myself, and it doesn't rock my world. I don't need that approval because I belong to something bigger than me that's lasted millennia and will last forever, right? So when a student has greater affection and identity for Christ and his kingdom, which is what we're cultivating, they can, with love and steadiness and patience and understanding, encounter a world that's at odds with them, not lose heart, not lose their own identity, maybe not even lose their faith, but also not be an unnecessary stumbling block to their peers, because we will be a stumbling block just by believing something differently than someone else. My belief's going to trip someone up. But I don't want it to be unnecessary. I want it to be because, look, it was just going to trip them up, not because I was an oaf or I was a jerk. I was hateful or spiteful. And so every day we're building their lives, hopefully they are, by their practices on these rocks that they're not sheltering, they're equipping, right? And it doesn't matter if the kid's an unbeliever when they graduate, they still will have partaken of things that are transcendently good, true, and beautiful. That will equip them for the best life possible in that worldview in which they find themselves. And we don't have some sense of they graduate and there's 40 seniors and 30 of them are Christians and 10 of them aren't. We're not going to say, well, we only had a 75% graduation rate this year. We don't view ourselves as responsible for all of that. That's bigger than the scope of what we can accomplish in the school. But if every day we're leaning into wisdom and virtue in this kind of ongoing classical great conversation, we think we're doing something distinctive that's just different than what's happening and more, just more wonderful, quite frankly, than what's happening in other models.
Where are virtue and wisdom? Okay. And the what is good and what is beautiful and what is true, that kind of language is just absent in the public education sphere. It also seems generally absent in overt civic society, at least at a national level. At least other than what might be talking points for one political side or another. Even what we teach in the public school around virtue seems to be just very narrow around things like tolerance.
Yep.
So, I mean, if there is a virtue, even if it might be ironically or hypocritically administered, even if it might not be self-coherent. Mm-hmm. It does seem like tolerance, acceptance, and is now becoming affirmation, which is more than a virtue. That's actually an affirmation, is the acceptance of the entire framing around this thing, which is why that's a whole nother thing, and perhaps a bridge too far, or a Trojan horse, when you go beyond. I am going to tolerate, or I'm even going to accept once you get to an affirm, and I'm not, just as a concept. What does it mean to affirm? What does it mean that I must acknowledge all of the way in which you contextualize this thing you put in front of me, as opposed to, I accept that you have a version, you have, whether within your school, within teachers, you have a interpretation of the Trinity, and I have mine. I think I'm right. I think you're wrong, but hey, here's why. Let's have some fun. Neither one is accepting the framework of the other, but neither is, you wouldn't say that one is, at least in that context, not tolerating the other. I mean, if you want to go back in his history in Europe, there was a time when people were killing each other
That's right.
over interpretations of the Trinity,
Yeah.
which is more of an ape, what chimps do with other chimp groups. Not necessarily what was at the core of what was supposed to be at the core of the teaching, but talking apes seem to do what talking apes do at times. I should be going somewhere with this, and I'm not sure where. But I just want to highlight some of these absences about a full spectrum of virtues, and what does it mean to have courage, and what do we really mean by that? And we don't even use the term bravery properly anymore. And,
no, we don't.
Action in spite of fear for especially for another, and in pursuit of your values. We call something, oh, that's so brave now, for all sorts of reasons, almost, except for, did you act, in a pursuit? Did you aim up and act in a pursuit of a good in the face of either fear or a real cost to you for this action? It's courage and bravery, giving people showing examples of it, rewarding it and identifying it, both little things that a young man might do and a young woman might do, as well as highlighting, great examples of it in history through the great books, without deconstructing the whole damn thing, or having to point out that, well, actually, as you know, Aristotle, he had slaves,
right?
Or whatever. And George Washington is actually a piece of shit, evil,
right.
such and such.
Yeah.
It's like, you're taking apart the fact that you're choosing in this case, like a George Washington. He was a complex person at his time, and human being, and taking a presentist view, which is to take the value, a modern value framework, and apply it backwards, and then judging the hell out of the person who was acting in that. It's just a game you're playing to basically rewrite the history for your own benefit. But we no longer, it seems, can just highlight the virtues of our historical figures that were part of our founding narratives. Not only do we not, so maybe when I grew up, we were sort of in a mid period where we would talk about the virtues of George Washington and deal with the more problematic elements of him being a slave owner. When I was really young, it was, and he's a good guy because when he died, he freed his slaves. He was like, well, didn't when they were alive, But we've gone all the way. But that was sort of like the caveat we would do, because we these things would come up. But now we've gone sort of full circle. It's like it's wrong to even point out anything he did that was courageous. Or the people that signed the Declaration of Independence, and that meant their death if this doesn't succeed.
Right,
you sign. This year. Yeah, we're gonna kind of kick away the king and all this army here, and they're probably gonna hang, or if we don't succeed signing it. And why are you doing that? We can't talk about those things, and now we just seem to point out the fact that they were oppressors.
Yeah,
and well, that's its own narrow highlighting of a particular thing. I'm ranting at the moment, but. We've just gone so far in our deconstruction that we no longer talk about virtues, and we don't even talk about them as though they're a thing that we should care about. We can't talk about wisdom, because whose wisdom? Whose framework? All frameworks are good except for the one framework, except for the framework that got us here. Yeah, except for any framing that got us to where we are foundationally here. That's of course. Terrible and oppressive, but any other framework we put on is as good as any other. You can't understand. You can't say, what is wisdom? What is it to grow wisdom? And then the other part that we seem to have gotten very wrong is, we're all about freedom and expression and individuality, and it just seems to be this sort of unmoored hedonistic sort of thing. Like instead of trying to find useful niches for society. It's just be different. Yep. And all difference is, amazing and should be celebrated in every way, shape, or form. And then we map that to these conceptualizations of freedom, as opposed to looking at rights and responsibilities, as looking at the U.S. and what we call freedoms was in the freedoms that were enshrined. The Bill of Rights that was protecting freedoms from the government, and why they were considered natural rights. Well, the right was because you're supposed to exercise those responsibilities. You're supposed to be a good person in society, and you're supposed to do these things. And so they are your responsibility here in the U.S., here in Western civilization, here as a Christian.
You can, maybe this brings that down to a kind of conclusion in terms of what I don't think is rambling so much, but that without a religious people, right, you end up, let's just take gun control as an example, right? So we have this Second Amendment, and it works for a religious people. It works for people who are governed by some higher ideals that have authority, or by a God who has defined what's acceptable, what the norms are, and who defines family, and who defines how communities should function morally and so forth. The kinds of things that lead to better mental health and all the other kinds of human flourishing that keep you from shooting innocent people, and virtuous human beings are promoted in that kind of good society. But when you remove that and you try to have our republic with our very own Bill of Rights, that Bill of Rights doesn't function without that narrative to hold the morality, the common morality of the people together. Your right to a firearm is
because you have a responsibility to your family and your
You could even
community.
make the case that we should repeal the Second Amendment if this is the kind of people that are going to be living in this country, right? Like, I'm not promoting that idea. I'm in Fargo. Well, Fargo, you can promote it, but I'm in North Dakota, that matters. And folks like us would probably say, hey, let's not start messing with the Second Amendment. But at the end of the day, those freedoms are for a people who have basically the prerequisites of freedom within them. But we're not educating young people to be free. We're educating in the masses, as it were, to be controlled and oppressed. And so therefore, that kind of people can't handle the rights that are in the Bill of Rights. And that's how you end up with, dictatorial governments.
Yeah.
And that's how you end up with people who are happy to give up their rights because they don't actually see that the issue here is your own vice, your own lack of virtue, and our society's lack of virtue.
Yeah, and your rights are not so that you can exercise all the combinatorial explosions of vice you can imagine.
Right.
I mean, it's about, these are your responsibilities, and there's a moral anchoring to those responsibilities. If you are to be a free person in this republic, the expectation is you act accordingly, and that means in order for the free society to function, all of the free citizens are supposed to help actually maintain not just order, but to maintain the narrative.
Yeah.
And to be productive, and the Bill of Rights themselves were to keep the government from messing with those things that we all had a personal responsibility for. So, and the reason I bring this up, because it was just to sort of bring back to Capstone the part that we really didn't explore that much, and we probably don't have too much time for it. But there is a thread that within your curriculum, and certainly consistent with like Hillsdale College's narratives, which is that the United States itself, is a continuation, at least in its founding and its founding documents and the intent of those founding documents. They weren't written arbitrarily. They were written by people, steeped in classical education, recognizing the complexity of both the statehood and trying to make a more perfect union, having to come up with a solution that didn't involve monarchy. These were not trivial people, and this was not a trivial construct. And the maintenance of the supporting narratives for our founding documents and our founding structures is critical for the whole damn center to hold.
Yep.
And we are now, at least in public culture, dealing with a huge swath of Americans who are now embracing a kind of either overtly anti-American, accepting the cartoon reduction of it's all oppressive systems,
Right.
Or at least just looking at the founding documents and the founders themselves from a sort of a cold, cynical view, as opposed to recognizing how essential those narratives are to us, keeping our anchoring and our mooring, and that the Capstone Classical Academy doesn't shy away from that.
No, in fact, there's some would kind of view what we do as having twofold citizenship training. One is for the kingdom of God. How do you live as a citizen of the United States, as a patriotic American, but also, and even primarily so if you're a Christian, as a citizen in an eternal kingdom that will outlast this one, the American. And so that is kind of American citizenship for our graduates is hopefully informed by citizenship in Christ's kingdom, which tells them how to relate to the government, how to be a fruitful citizen, whether they're here or in China. Like, how does one do that? Well, the Christian ethic and the teachings of Christ and the apostles actually give you a framework for how can I be salt and light in whatever kingdom I find myself in on earth. The United States is a heavily advantaged kingdom as far as earthly kingdoms go for a Christian to operate in. And the idea is that in this, we have greater responsibility here to steward something that's unique among all nations historically, and to treasure what of it actually leads to human flourishing, and then to do what it takes to preserve it. The ironic thing about those who would oppose, say, our Hillsdale membership, where we teach young people a lot of civics, and we go back and we read the political. We have a course in political philosophy, and so that's a part of our high school program: moral philosophy, political philosophy. We study the Constitution like K-12. It's not something you do for a semester in 8th grade and then once as a senior. The reason is because we believe that citizenship is how we exercise love of neighbor and love of God, and there's a way to do that that's not sectarian, and the Constitution is drafted in such a way that one can go about practicing their faith as a Christian without being sectarian in the way you think about helping the rest of the country to flourish within their own liberties that the same Constitution affords them. And we want our young people to go out and say, yeah, I'd like the country to reflect the ethics and the truth of Christ more than it does. And if I'm a state legislator or I'm in the Senate or whatever, or if I'm just a voting citizen or I'm on the school board, I'm going to work toward my ideals that I think are transcendently good, being present in the laws of our nation and in the character of our nation or our local community. But at the same time, I know how to function as a Christian in a pluralistic society that's governed by a constitution that has a separation of church and state. Well, the Constitution doesn't exactly have that, but it at least says the government can't make a law respecting it or the establishment of it. So our students are going to live in that dual citizenship if they're Christians. The goal is that they glorify God and reflect well upon and lead people to Christ while being Americans who care about the rights of their fellow citizens who have different belief systems. And so it's not, people might look at a school like ours or Hillsdale and say, oh, those are Christian nationalists, or I don't think what I'm saying is really reflecting that. Everybody's worldview or faith or narrative, their meta-narrative for life, is going to influence the way they govern, what laws they think should be passed, and so forth. So if you believe, as every ideologue out there does, that there's some way that the nation would be better for me or for everyone, hopefully, they're going to promote that within the laws of the land, in their own citizenship and their practice of citizenship. So,
I think that the word Christian nationalism is currently a. I guess I don't know if it's a. I don't think boogeyman's the right term, because I actually think there is, to some extent, an overt Christian nationalism vein. I don't think it's anywhere near as large and menacing as the left talks about, and it certainly isn't this.
No, it's not this.
And so maybe can you talk a little about differentiation a little bit for somebody that might just say, what last thing we need is a bunch of Christian nationalists. What is, how are you not? And then maybe we can work to bring a close on the conversation to talk about a little.
Well, nobody agrees on the definition of Christian nationalism, so that's one of the challenges. You've got I think there's some folks in Moscow, Idaho, Doug Wilson and his crew, New St. Andrews College, and all of the, you've got like Steubenville, Ohio, where there's like this Catholic revival going on, outside of Pittsburgh, where localism is being practiced and it's becoming, somewhat pervasively Catholic culture within the community. It's intentional. People are moving there to do that.
Okay.
They're doing it in Moscow, Idaho on a Reformed Christian perspective, and so and that's a localistic kind of view too. And people look at some of those and they might call that like some kind of Christian nationalism because they're seeking to kind of infiltrate and make sure that the faith basically drives that community in its branches of government and in its, economics and everything. I think to some extent, the United States is an expression of a Judeo-Christian ideology working itself out with influence from pagans though too. And that didn't make us Christian nationalists up front or Christian theist nationalist up front, whatever we were, deists, some of the founding fathers. I think it's just a matter of your worldview impacts your politics. Now, what Christian nationalism means, I think, to those who are afraid of it or who use it as a derogatory term, is the idea that you want to basically use the scriptures as the law of the land. You want a theocracy of some kind, and you want to make certain, and basically that would strip us of rights that are in our Constitution. That kind of boogeyman description of Christian nationalism is something that I think very few people, I don't know, there's got to be somebody out there. I've not encountered people who have that view of what Christian nationalism is, unless it's that left kind of fear-mongering view of these Christians who want to take control of the country and make it a Christian nation, the same way that you would have an Islamic nation where you've got Sharia law
right.
Driving things. I don't know Christians who are trying to do that. But at the same time, I assume if you're on, say, like a feminist pro-choice track and you're viewing life through that lens, you might view Christians working against abortion as a threat to the rights of others based on your personal faith
right.
and not on some agreed-upon reality or moral good. And I suppose that's Christian nationalism then so I think that term is slippery, but everybody's working. I'd like to believe the best about every human, but I think we're all scoundrels for the most part, unless we're redeemed by something bigger than us. But I'd like to give the benefit of the doubt to most movements and say, okay, the reason that they're trying to pass these laws or get elected to these offices or have this political action committee is because they believe that their view of the world is good for everyone. And they're trying to promote that. The nice thing about the United States is that ideas can compete with one another,
right.
and some of them can get kicked out later. And our Constitution, when our students learn, the Constitution can handle the debates, and it can handle the pendulum swings. But let's live within it, or we're not going to be able to handle them anymore. It's going to end up an oppressive regime because no longer will anything stand in its way. And so we have to be comfortable with losing some battles, no matter what ideology we agree with. As a Christian, I've got to peacefully accept the loss of some battles politically and say, that's not what the people in this country want. I lost that one. But I could keep working toward influencing it to go a different way because I believe it's better for our nation. And maybe I believe it glorifies God too. Maybe I have a religious motive in that, but everyone does. It's just not explicit for everybody. Everyone worships or lives towards some greater good and gives themselves to it. They get lost in something. It might be self. That might be the God they're serving. But everyone does. And so there's nationalism of all types. The goal is that the uniting narrative we have is not a religious one in terms of God, certainly not in 2024, right? What we can have in our nation is a kind of patriotism that values the good that is America and the concept, the idea that we've been living out for these centuries. And as soon as we start to throw that baby out with the bathwater, which is what Hillsdale's working against and what we're working against as a school that's educating citizens for fruitful citizenship for the good of all Americans, then we're in trouble.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful that Hillsdale has been so supportive in our start because, they've curated excellent classical curriculum. They provide teacher training.
There's something unique about Capstone and its relationship with Hillsdale, isn't there, in terms of it being a first of a kind?
So we're the first Christian school and tuition-based school that Hillsdale's worked with. They had this Barney Charter School initiative. And the vision was that the classical liberal arts have been lost in schools. It wasn't a Christian mission. It wasn't a political mission. It was just the classical liberal arts are how we built the West. I mean, these are the studies that make scholars. These are the studies that make thoughtful people, moral and virtuous people. So when you throw all of that out for some kind of pragmatic moment, that you want to meet some other need and forget the past and live in arrogant presence, I think they were concerned about that. So they said, the public schools aren't doing too well. About 2011, they launched their first, they don't launch, Hillsdale doesn't run the schools. What they do is they've developed an office that donors gave to support the establishment of schools. So it's consulting and training.
Creating content and frameworks around curriculum.
Right, helping to create
you.
really good, and then curate and improve that content based on the experience on the ground in schools. So in about 2011, the Barney Charter School Initiative, through some initial donors, helped the first board start a charter school that was classical in the United States. And then they did another and another and another, and now there's, I think, 21 charter schools that are Hillsdale member schools. And then our team applied to be a Hillsdale member school as a private tuition-based school. Since North Dakota doesn't have charters, there really was no other option other than to be a private school in North Dakota. And Hillsdale then interviews the headmaster candidate, makes sure that they don't mind the brand being attached to that individual school. They interview the board. The board has to go for some visits. There's an application and evaluation process. There's site visits from the K-12 education office at Hillsdale. And then if you go through all those rigors and they say, we think that you're going to make a great, successful school, we'd like to partner with you. They provide free of charge to us new faculty training. We go to their campus twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year, depending on who you are. But the teachers go every June, and they get continued training and good teaching methods and curriculum. Everything you'd expect to get in professional development for schools, but from a classical perspective. And so I think it's invaluable to us because we opened as a new school. And basically I had all this faculty at Hillsdale College that was working ahead of me and then was there for us when we opened. So they've come and they did classroom observations, give us feedback on the effectiveness of our teachers. I was there last week, with leaders from around the country. So that's a great partnership, and one that our parents are deeply thankful for. They can see the fruit of that partnership on the ground. And for Fargo, I mean, the people who support Capstone who didn't really know us before we started, there was kind of an instant familiarity and credibility that was there because, Hillsdale's basically endorsing this school, so I guess we should go take a look at it. Maybe it is something that'll be good for Fargo. But it works the other way too. The folks who are concerned about Hillsdale for whatever reason. And I would say, again, you have to go to campus, meet with those students, meet those professors, see what they're about. That is a school that encourages free thinking. It encourages lots of civil discourse. They read all kinds of ideas. They're not trying to pump out carbon copies of some ideologue. It's a really unique place.
Yeah, I think that if people didn't know anything about this school before listening to this, or if they didn't really have a understanding what classical education is, to anyone that's going to say, well, that's just a bunch of Christian nationalists, or that's just a bunch of just going to make a bunch of Trump supporters, or whatever. The classical liberal arts, that's millennia of scholarly tradition. That is, a non-trivial amount of, scholarly, inertia that one doesn't just turn on a dime for some, short-term, political or populist agenda kind of thing. And that while Christianity might ramify into many, many different ways, including sort of fundamentalist ways that were certainly a boogeyman in the 80s for people on the left. If somebody has that in their minds, that they're just fixated on their experiences, and maybe they were raised in that kind of environment, and they view Christianity as just this oppressive thing, and they think that this is somehow going to make a bunch of dogmatic, mindless dogmatic, Christian zombies. The anchoring to the classical education, and then the finding the coherence between the Christian education and the classical liberal arts education, and not running into where it might not be exactly clear how to reconcile some of these things and how people have different views on how to reconcile that. I don't understand how that kind of a construction could be turned into like a short-term ideology, give birth to some sort of short-term ideology to be a political movement for the way they pathologize concepts of Christian nationalism and that sort of thing. This is rigor.
It is.
You may not agree with some of the,
and it's a revival of something old, as you've said. It's not a new movement, and it was virtually every school in the West until the 20th century or late 19th century. So there's a sense in which you're not venturing into anything risky.
Right.
Here.
And so what is we've clearly, while we absolutely do not agree in why we've gone too far, whatever we really, because you start to have to pick a dimension. I just did a distance metaphor, a dimension of we've gone too far. We don't agree in what do we mean by that. But I think that we could probably have consensus amongst people in the West that however the hell we got here, we've screwed a number of things up. We don't seem to know what we're doing, where we're going, and that manifests itself all around. Whether that's the level of despair, whether that's the hedonistic expressions everywhere, whether that's the drug addiction, whether that's the not seem to care the fact that we just print money. So we'll get to 30 trillion in national debt. Well, as whatever. That's the whole. Are we really vested in the future? And
that's that lack of piety I was talking about early in the conversation.
So we don't.
Yeah.
I think we've reached a point at the zeitgeist where there's the yikes. What have we done? Mm-hmm. But we don't seem to be anywhere near a consensus on here is how we screwed up. But in this kind of uncertainty about where to go next, in a situation where we're not in a good place. The conservative, not in a non-political sense, the conservative view is look at things empirically and look at things from tradition. Look at things that have served us. Look at the times and the structures and the narratives that we have, evidence didn't do this, and recognize that from within that framing that there's baby in that bathwater. Maybe not dump the whole tub. Maybe dumping the whole tub was a dumb idea. If you're going to renew and you're going to reset, so to speak, even in the face of doubt, even if somebody isn't a Christian or isn't fully a Christian, or if they're like me who used to be an atheist, and I describe, as I said, it's an engineering concept. I'm asymptoting my way back to God. The current view, which is to say, we don't know where we came from. Maybe we came from nothing. We don't know where we're going. It all might be everybody's truth is the same. In all of that deconstructive view is a disaster. And so even if we might not, as an individual, immediately be able to just go back to a particular different viewpoint, where should we maybe start our kids off? This is a practical view. This is as a person who currently right now does not attend to a church and looks at this as a practical view. The present way we're doing things, what we have done is served up a heaping pile of dog shit at the table.
Yep.
While no past period was ever perfect, there is certainly something to be said for the stability and purpose and the meaning that people used to have. So the classical liberal arts and in a Christian framing seems like if you're going to start somewhere, that's a good place to start for literally the sake of our children. So that's why I wanted to bring our Crosswinds network, hopefully growing Crosswinds network, bring Capstone Classical Academy to that network from an attention standpoint. It's why I'm a supporter of the school, both from a platforming it and talking to people and as a donor, and full disclosure. How can other people listening to this that aren't in Fargo, and they're not in a big metro area, they might be in a small town. Is this a template? What have people been reaching out to you? Is the Capstone a template, or is it the Hillsdale a template? What can we do to scale this?
Yeah, well, there's several of us across the country who are working on templates, and certainly we consult, most of us for free. People reach out to Capstone regularly. In our region, okay, we even cross the border. There's a school in Manitoba, a founding team in Manitoba that wants to start a school. And so we're talking. They're going to be down here in March to visit campus. We've had some Zoom calls. I sent them some financial tools today to help them think about strategy from a financial perspective. There's a group in Jamestown that's working right now. We've been around a kitchen table there 3 times now, I think, meeting with founding members. They've been to the school twice. We're working through what that looks like. We've got 2 schools in Michigan that are consulting with us, 2 in Pittsburgh. So there's a sense in which this.
So what does a team in Michigan see in you that, as opposed to another classical academy?
They see success, and they're right behind us, right? So they could look at a school that was established 20 years ago and ask, but they're not, because that was 20 years ago.
Sure. Oh yeah.
So they're saying, well, okay, well you
literally raised
the
now,
money,
and
right?
And
you raised all that money, and you've got all these students, and it seems like everything's working for you. Of course, the first answer you always give to those folks is, well, understand your context is not our context. So it would take a deep study of your context, and you would go through a feasibility kind of study to figure out, like, what is the scope of our potential here, and what should it look like for us. But there are groups like Hillsdale. Now, to work with Hillsdale, you have to go through an application process. You don't have to do that to work with a school that's just interested in helping you, that's already found success themselves. But Hillsdale is a good option to provide some board training and some strategy support and so forth. But the Society for Classical Learning, the Association of Classical and Christian Schools, they're in that market as well in terms of being associations of hundreds of schools. There's about 1,000 schools like ours in the country. And so we all work together to see the cause promoted, because we just believe it's going to cause flourishing wherever it goes. And the people in Fargo have supported it because they think it will help the Fargo-Moorhead area for generations. They don't view it as, it's helping that private school where those parents send their kids. They view it as, well, that's one of our schools, and we need a school like that, and that's going to produce in our community. And so that's in some ways unique to our area. And even this region of the country to some extent. When I was in Philadelphia for 19 years at a school there that we transitioned to a classical model over the years. And, there when you were talking to the community of millions of people about support for your school, they're like, well, why would I do that? I send my kids over here. Or, business owners would be like, well, why would I do that? I mean, you're a private school. We've got good public schools. There's no Fargo, this area, the philanthropy is tremendous. Clearly, there's a lot of entrepreneurial people here, and they just spin off more entrepreneurial people, right? This is a place to be proud of. I didn't know that before I got here, but it's a place to be proud of. And many of us want it to be kept a secret nationally, but it's also good to be known that we're doing something right here. And I am a fan now. 2 years ago, I would have said, I don't know about Fargo. In fact, that's what I said when I found out about this founding team. But in fact, I think my exact words were "bless their hearts." I doubt that's going to happen, but here we are. So there is a sense in which there's national attention, no doubt. Part of that's because of the Capitol campaign. Part of it's because of how quickly just the whole thing is taking off. We're at about year 7 in terms of typical statistical analysis of where our school is. Well, we're in year 2, so the average classical school takes 7 years to get where we are. Not financially, they never get there. Right? The generosity here to build our campus has been astounding. But there is a sense in which if people want to make a difference, the classical homeschool movement is growing dramatically. It's the most popular kind of approach to homeschooling. It's challenging for homeschoolers to do that, but they work in co-ops. Classical Conversations is a really nice program. There's a few chapters locally of that. But people start schools all the time.
There are groups of homeschoolers in the community that are using a classical education approach.
Yeah. Yeah, if you look up Classical Conversations online, you'll find some of those groups. That's not the only way to approach it classically, but it is I don't want to say turnkey, but it's certainly an easier way to get into classical education. If you're thinking about homeschooling as a solution to your concern for your children, then that's a good place to go, among others. But we also partner with parents who are looking. When parents come to admissions, I often look at them and say, have you considered homeschooling before you came here? Because that's really where that's where the game is. If you can homeschool, there's a lot of freedom to do that just right for your kids and get them involved socially and civically and other things in town, but your church, whatever. But homeschooling is a really powerful option for parents. And contrary to the Teachers Guild out there that might want to kind of protect the expertise class, you don't have to send your kids to an institution in order to receive an excellent education or be shaped powerfully for good.
I think anyone that has even a remotely honest view of the public K through 12, and what we actually have for a student experience, to defend the what we have for credentials, what we have for gatekeeping, to be qualified to be a teacher, and then the policies that we put in place, whether that's driven locally or federal, tied to dollars and state and that sort of thing, that the constraints we put on it, to think that that's producing, to think that that's the thing we want to scale, that's the thing we want to continue, that we're doing good. It's like, what?
Well, you as a parent get to decide. I mean, and that's the thing you want to drive home, right? You said practically, what do parents, what can they do? Well, yeah, you can write a check and send your kid to a private school like Capstone, but that's not your only option. There are other ways to tackle it. Let's not limit our creativity for our children, right? And it's for the sake of our community. So, and again, I would say that at Capstone, we're for the public school system. We're for reform within the public school system.
But you have to show.
In the meantime, don't sacrifice your children to it if you don't think that that's going to produce what you want for your children.
Yeah. I mean, the public school system has served to create, historically, to make sure we had a minimum education, a civic education, to be able to be productive free citizens, and having a binding narrative. Especially with a nation produced largely by immigrants, I certainly don't take, and nor am I hearing some sort of anti-public education. It's just the present moment. The public education system is as corrupted and unmoored as the greater culture is, and until we can remedy that, and the mission of the Crosswinds Institute is to try to regionally bring attention to that and give voice to that and drive discussions around that, because regionally there are things we can do. There are schools, whether it's a homeschool, or a new brick and mortar school, and other things. These are not the solutions are not coming from on high. The solutions are not coming from some national place. In fact, the discussions can't even be had at the national place anymore. We can't even have discourse at the national level anymore. If we're going to fix these problems, right the ship, get going in the right direction, get back to a common binding narrative, we have to bring attention to it, and we have to take action. And there is a lot of this stuff that can be fixed local outward. And we are trying to do what we can. We're trying as a media project to try to platform the things that people ought to be thinking about, templating, scaling, supporting, because this is only fixed if we fix it. And all of this conversation shouldn't change engagement in public schools by parents, and anything that a parent can do or a community member can do to try to influence the direction of public schools, to try to deconstrain some of the ways that we've forced things onto teachers. Anything we can do to make the credentialing less guild-like. All of that should be done in parallel with the supporting of schools like that. So maybe for our final question here, and this has been a fantastic discussion. Obviously, the people that are hearing this, that are excited by it and want to support it, my understanding is the capital campaign is almost wrapped up, but maybe not completely. But then there's also a lot of opportunities for scholarship support.
Yeah,
like pick what as a potential donor. Understand that the renderings of the building look fantastic. I mean, and beauty is actually a transcendent value.
Yep.
And so why should our schools look like? I mean, some of our schools, especially the ones built in the stark square 1960s, they're sort of indistinguishable from prisons.
Nice brutalist architecture.
And to be in a structure that was intentionally designed and manifest to be beautiful is not a trivial thing for a human being. And if you're going to be forming young minds and you want adults helping with that to be able to talk with a spark, why shouldn't the building they're in be as beautiful as possible? And again,
right.
the donor support has made that. So I would certainly, anyone listening to this that has the means to think about various ways for financial support. But a lot of people are different times in their life, or they're not in a situation wealth-wise to support it. What are ways, directly or indirectly, that the community can support either Capstone or this effort more broadly?
Yeah, well, I think, in terms of Capstone, it's a matter of just engaging school leadership or maybe even faculty you might know there, but many people won't know anybody at the school at this stage, right? There's probably, 400 people in the Capstone community, if you count everybody that's involved in some way. That's not a large number of people for our community. So you could reach out literally to the school through the website or give me a call and say, hey, what do you need right now? We're launching a $500,000 library collection for the new campus. We had a donor give us $500,000 for books. And so we're really excited about creating a great collection there and having, kind of a flagship library for the region for K-12. And so we need people. That's a mammoth task. So it might be that we've got some aspiring librarians out there who want to help to process books or want to work with us on cataloging, or so many volunteer opportunities to get engaged in making a difference at the school. Obviously, you can't just come into a classroom willy-nilly. There's a lot you have to do to get engaged in the actual educational process. But there's lots of ways to support the school through volunteerism. But the scholarship program is big. You mentioned that, but just making it accessible to families. It grieves us that we would ever become a school that can't serve low-income families, and so far so good, but we're going to need more of that. Campus should be complete debt-free. This campaign, I believe, will reach 100%, but we're at $52 million out of $53 million.
Wow.
And so there's still $3 million out there. And ordinarily, I would say, $3 million campaign, that's a lift. I'm a little less concerned because of how we've been able to receive funds so far, but we still do have to close that gap. So there is that. But bigger than that, the cause itself is about wisdom and virtue for young people. And, anywhere you can get involved in your family, in your local school, in your church, in your youth organization, with your neighbors, whatever it is you can do to help young people to feel grounded to something bigger than them, to point them to exemplars in life. What is a job well done? Who is a good person for me to follow? What are some ideals that I can believe in? Teach them patriotic things. Help them to feel some sense of affection for those who gave them what they have today. Help them to feel some sense of stewardship. All of us who've experienced any amount of joy or blessing in our community, whether it's being from Fargo, Moorhead, or just the Northern Plains, or whether it's being an American, being a member of our church, whatever it is, we can pass on to young people our spirit of gratitude, and we can point to those that we look to as examples. If it's not God, right? If it's not the gospel, if it's not a study of scriptures, at least point to something bigger than the child. We can all fight this sense of, aggrandizing self, thinking that we're going to find meaning and purpose inside of ourselves. That's the main problem with our society today. It's just this hedonistic desire to fulfill myself with whatever my appetite is, and cultivating in our young people, which we can all do, the right desires, the value of delayed gratification. It's pretty simple today as mom or dad just to say no to something, can't have that yet. Let's work first. Or there's lots of simple things we can do. We get caught up in, politics. Who's going to win the presidential election? How are we going to get this law passed? School choice. And these are all good things to be concerned about. But you can be pouring all your energy into those things, and your children are sitting right in front of you, your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews. And all they need is you to just show them, how'd you get to where you are? And why does it matter? And that's it. You just work as locally as possible with the people in your circle. And if Capstone wasn't here and we were all doing that, it wouldn't matter, but we're here,
Well said. Well said. Paul Fisher, Headmaster of Capstone Classical Academy. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.